Hey guys, and welcome to the stream for episode 15, I think.
15.
Yeah, it's getting there. We've done a few now.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm Simon, and this is Tim.
I'm Tim.
And yeah, we're going to do a little bit of different stuff tonight. Well, kind of the same, but a different format. I think tonight what we're going to do is, rather than sort of a discussion topic at the start, we're going to just head straight into some critiques and things.
Yep.
And yeah, kind of do some of that, and then kind of like Tim was doing a demo last week with line drawing, and so we thought, you know, spend a bit of time just coloring it up and trying to get it a bit more resolved, I guess.
Yep.
So you guys can kind of follow along with that process. Like always, hit us up in the chat with any, you know, ideas or discussion topics or any questions you're having, you know, about art stuff during the week.
Yep.
I'm more than happy to, yeah, kind of change topics as we kind of move along. So yeah. So some of the things, I guess, just a couple of little things to show you guys that kind of been doing this week is. We swap here. Yeah, just some. This is kind of a class demo.
Which is
for digital painting.
Yep.
Oh,
is this still The Witcher?
This is The Witcher. Yeah. So basically,
it's just a class exercise.
Yeah, that's right. So it's kind of like The Witcher 4, and just come up with stuff for The Witcher. Yeah. So essentially, what I did was
this is you were kind of halfway through this process before. It's like building out your city in SketchUp plus shot.
Yep. So basically, hang on, if I can just do this, it makes a little bit more sense. Yep, like that. Yep. So essentially, I think like last week, I kind of have like a really rough 3D scene that literally had like 3 buildings in there, I think. So I kind of went away and sort of, I guess, modeled up a bit of a layout that I wanted for the image, and then from there, just kind of took it into Keyshot and did some renders and things like that, and kind of messed around with the lighting. So this class was really about like keeping it simple, you know. Even though this looks really complex, this was just a mix of like, you know, the SketchUp warehouse, taking into SketchUp. Just there wasn't really modeling as such. I mean, I broke some things apart and kind of stuck them back together and stuff. But then it was just layout. So just moving stuff around, making the layout for the composition that you kind of wanted. And then it was just taking it into Keyshot. And for those of you who don't know, Keyshot's just like a rendering program, and it's pretty much like point and click. You just you go into the environment and you throw in a HDRI, and that basically just does all the lighting. And then you just adjust sliders. That's all you do. and you get it to work. And then just did a nice little 4K render of the image. And what's really cool about the Keyshot is it can spit out like render passes that are really simple. Actually, that's not the one that it kind of spits out, but it's this one here. And it has all these different little, you know, render passes that the program kind of gives you, you know, that you can kind of choose to do. So there's some really cool stuff, because you can kind of go in and use this stuff to your advantage and kind of control things. Well,
you've already got selections done at some point, because it's just saying, you know, where the light's hitting or where the reflected light's hitting, or is it just like what is it doing when it serves out some of those lighting passes? Is it based on lighting, or is it just saying every?
Well, I think some of them. I think like this is like a shadow pass. And then it's got a lighting pass and a global illumination pass and all those types of things, and a diffuse and really what you want to do in Photoshop is you just want to grab some of those layers and then, you know, multiply them or set them to different layer properties over the top of the image, and they'll tend to just like punch out the image a bit more. And the more, you know, kind of advanced you get, the more you can kind of control it and, you know, get them to help with the lighting and the shadows and all that kind of stuff. So like what's interesting is we had this render here, and my goal in the class was to make this building be the focal point of the image. And you see right now it's all just like a big mess of stuff. You know, it's just buildings and things. But to me, I'm like, yeah, great, composition's awesome, everything's in the right spot. Like I can kind of I get what I want to do with it. And so the class was about kind of developing that focus. So, you know, if we have a look at where it kind of got to, is that you know, you can see here by controlling the lighting and some elements and things like that, we're really starting to pull a focus into that, you know, building there, and sort of getting some characters and, you know, bits and pieces and things like that. So this still needs like a lot of work. And I was saying to the class that, you know, this is a 40, 50 hour painting. You know, it's going to take a week to do, you know, at least a few days, but it, you know, and it's going to take a bit of on and off, a lot of, you know, going in, just doing details and stuff like that. But, you know, if you want to make one of those kind of Last of Us paintings or Uncharted paintings that you see with all those things that look amazing and all that kind of stuff, like that's the process that you use to kind of do that. You know, and a combination of those things, and it's going to take a long time. There's no like, it's not a, you know, speed painting. It's get in there and just do all the bits and pieces.
But it doesn't mean that you have the ability to take it that far. Whereas I think one of the issues is if you were to draw all this out yourself, it would take a while, right? But it's not going to take that much longer, right? I mean, if you're good at doing that, but you know, I think the problem is always, you know, if you just kind of start a speed painting and sort of sketch it out, it's kind of, you have to decide whether you're going to take it further.
That's right.
And often the initial construction you've sort of done just isn't really enough to get you to that high level of sort of detail. So starting with 3D like that always means it's an option.
Yeah.
Because like even at the very least, you've still got that scene. You can take that scene and kind of do other render passes. Do you know what I mean? Like if you have that shot saved, you can kind of, you know, keep modeling or kind of like work on it. It's always like an option. Whereas so often with drawing, I feel like people are like, oh, I kind of did this cool thing. Now I want to take it to the next level. I want to kind of add detail, and it's like you have to go back and redraw all of that because there's just not actually enough information there. You know what I mean? Whereas
I think like for people starting out, that's actually a real tricky thing, is to work out how to approach doing this stuff. And you see the things on ArtStation or, you know, online or whatever, and you're like, it just seems so unachievable, if that makes sense. But really it's sort of like, yeah, if you kind of break the image down that the artist has done, it's sort of like, oh yeah, okay, well that kind of makes sense. So yeah, it's just like picking the right tool, right, for the job. Yeah, and I guess like in my mind, I had that this was going to be a really, you know, finished production style painting that's something that has a lot of fidelity to it and is, you know, kind of doing all those things. So yeah, I guess they're just kind of, you know, things to sort of think about when you're doing this stuff. But you know, once again, like I said, the main goal was really, you know, trying to keep it simple. And even though it's a pretty complicated image, it was still, you know, just build up all the things that you've learned over the last 12 weeks. You know, keep those things simple, or even like looking at how the black and white values work and stuff. You know, and you can really see that through controlling some of those things, you can really bring focal points to where you want them to be and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so it's pretty cool, and I'd really like to get this painting finished done at some point. That would be good. But yeah, a bit busy at the moment, so we'll see how we go. But hopefully, so yeah, there was that one there, and just a little kind of this is a really quick. Oh, what's going on here?
Photoshop is slow. That's what's going on.
This was a really quick painting that I did this morning that is essentially a cobbled together piece from different artists that are working on the same project. But I guess just to sort of like give you guys an idea of sort of like production art, I suppose, where you know, it's not always like super pretty and stuff. It's more just done for,
and not always an auteur sort of scenario where you're creating everything. And
that's right.
You know, you're like, I did everything. Frequently.
And kind of as you go on in projects and stuff, you kind of lose that feeling quite a bit, and you start. Well, I think it's just you start like really enjoying working as a team and things, and kind of like just working together to create, you know, an end product, I guess. So this was something I kind of did, which was, this was one of Ned's paintings, and we kind of needed a bit more kind of like we needed it just to be constructed differently for our animatic that we're putting together. So essentially there's kind of a character kind of dropping down here and things, and needed some rocks for it to drop onto and kind of like bounce down through the scene. and stuff. And then there was this part here that was going to be kind of like a blur, kind of like, you know, swipe down kind of thing, where you're not kind of seeing much. And then essentially what's going to happen is, as it gets down here, the character is going to get kind of smaller. So like, you know, the scale is going to kind of change a little bit. And just a little kind of tiny character, you know. Let's see if we can just quickly, just any brush. So
lucky I left your brushes on there.
I don't even know what these layers are, but anyway. See, you know, so character might be kind of that big in here, whereas up here, you know, the character's sort of like this big. So we can just do some things where we're kind of mucking around with like the camera and the scale and things like that as it kind of goes down. And then the character's going to kind of jump down here and stuff. And then basically like, having these big chains as kind of like scale reference, and then kind of, moving through to the kind of ground area and stuff where, you know, then the character's going to kind of walk through sort of thing. So, but here the character's, you know, kind of really small, you know, these things are gigantic.
Cool.
So that was just a quick little painting, and I think there was some of Ned's and some of Cody's, and there was a couple of different artists, like bits of images that I just kind of like jammed into this image. But then I handed this on to someone else to then paint up. So it's basically like, this is kind of what I want, you know, can you please now go away and make this painting kind of look pretty. So
make it work.
So I guess, like, guys, if you're kind of thinking about like sort of what an art director sort of role would be and things like that, this is kind of a lot of things that, you know, I would do, which is kind of come up with lots of sort of big picture ideas, and then, you know, like sort of hand them over to the team for people to execute. So then you guys that are kind of watching this would then, you know, jump onto this painting and kind of, you know, finish it up and resolve it and stuff, and then and then between a few people kind of get it to work. So just thought that's kind of an interesting thing to show. Just kind of like production style art for this type of thing.
Well, I mean, often I think people are sort of often worried about, if you get one of those like first jobs, that you're going to be sort of creating a whole bunch of stuff, you know what I mean? And that someone's going to be like, right, day one, create the main character for the game, you know? And it's like, frequently, you may be, for a while, especially because I think often it takes people a while to really settle into a job. You know, you're much more likely to be given something like this, where it's sort of, most of it's sort of done. You know what I mean? You can sit back a little bit more and sort of just focus on the technical stuff.
For sure. Because
like
it's like
there's lots of things like that happen.
So when you start a new job, guys, like the boss who's employing you will know that you haven't done much of this before or whatever, and be like, okay, let's ease this person in. It won't be like, oh, surprise, here you have to have 50 things done by tomorrow. You know, because we know that you're not going to be capable of doing that, right? So so you'll get things like crates and barrels and you know, and kind of easy things to do, and then you sort of like build it up and and ease into those roles and stuff. So I think it was a really good point, you know, how it can start and stuff. So for sure.
What else have you got?
And I think that was it. Cool. In terms of just those things that I've been working on. The other thing that I did want to kind of show was just, you know, always like to mention some of the artists that we like, or things we've been checking out during the week. And certainly one of my favorite artists, Kang Lee, updated his website. So I'll just post it in the chat. It's just kang-lee.com.
I think there's a few Kang Lees.
There is.
I think there's a few Kang Lees that work like in the entertainment industry. It can be kind of confusing, but so obviously Star Wars, nothing in there yet, but there's certainly like a lot of cool stuff on the website. So and obviously because I like my environment paintings, there's lots of awesome Kang stuff, which is great. So things for Alien and whatever else. So so there's lots of really cool stuff on the website. So encourage you guys to kind of check that one out for sure. Also a good example
of
of
sharing these images here. Hang on
share
a second.
them actually.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, I feel like Kang's stuff is always like a really good example of stuff that I feel like he's one of the best artists at sort of actually creating like a really, really high level of polish with stuff that's probably obviously like production painting.
Yeah.
Like I mean, sort of more concept painting. You know, it's obvious to see that this isn't stuff that he spent, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks on. It does feel like it is sort of actual concept art. You know, like a lot of people kind of post concept art, and it's, you know, it's often the most finished, kind of polished stuff out there. You know, whereas I feel like his stuff always has that sort of like perfect balance between, you know, like it looks like it's got like, it's sort of like really sort of punchy, you know, sort of like accurate, but then you kind of look at it and it's like, wow, some of that's really sketchy. You know, I'd say like he's definitely one of the best artists out there like that. When you look at a painting and you're just like, oh my god, that's amazing, and then you look at it and you're like, what is there? You know what I mean? There's so much sort of just like, you know, he's just really good at sort of picking what's important in an image and kind of picking out the interesting bits. Yeah,
no, that's right. So sorry guys, I don't actually know how to share the screen here for the internet, but yeah. So anyway, just check out the Kang Lee website, and yeah, you'll be able to see what we mean for sure. And then Tim was also talking about a book that he'd been reading.
If you can share that.
Yeah, well, we'll just
as a thing. Is it not sharing?
No.
That's good. Is it sharing Photoshop?
Well, yeah, it is sharing Photoshop.
Just not.
That's right.
Just not when you put an internet browser there?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's important to have, we're doing the streaming now. It's important not to pretend that
we are doing some different stuff tonight, and it could be a little bit interesting.
We're proper Twitch people now. We don't have production staff and anything. So this is just a book I was reading this week, and I thought it was sort of interesting. Just something that, you know, maybe because we've got a lot of sort of students who are heading into the holidays. A lot of people want to work in video games, so this is kind of a bit of a, you know, I would sort of describe it as, you know, a bit of like a, it's sort of fairly sort of lighthearted, sort of maybe sugar coated. It's a bit sort of like a popcorn sort of book, but it's about sort of, you know, how games are made and the stories behind some sort of very popular games. It's it probably does have, you know, a bit of sort of like insider sort of like gossip on the production, you know, issues and sort of highs and lows of, you know, some sort of very prominent games that came out.
Yeah,
it's sort of just, this book just came out, so cool. It talks about, you know, games that, you know, came out last year. Do you know what I mean? Not just you know, ones that came out, you know, 5 or 20 years ago or something like that.
Cool.
And it's sort of designed for anyone to read, so it doesn't really require any knowledge of games. It's probably even it actually sort of errs a little bit more on the side of, you know, telling you stuff you probably already know. If you're actually if you're sort of, if you know anything about the video game industry. But I just thought, you know, if anyone sort of wanted a bit more information, it's probably a fairly effective, palatable way to kind of go and look at that. And I think it's written by Jason Schreier, who's, I think he's like a sort of video game journalist, you know, who's, I forget which site he works for, maybe like Kotaku or one of those sort of sites. Cool. Writes for Wired. So it's pretty interesting. I was sort of I've been reading it, you know, last week. I'm not that far through it, but yeah, just definitely if you're sort of curious, if you don't religiously read gaming websites and you're not up on all the gossip, you know, some people are. Some people who want to get in games are really, you know, they know all about. Because especially, you know, I find it's really useful to hear about like the horror stories that happen at game companies, because if you work in games, it'll definitely happen to you that you'll be at a company that just explodes at some point in time. You know, like it's very hard to
avoid that one.
It is, right? And that's just the nature of the beast, right? It is a very unstable industry, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, your career is unstable, but the industry itself is not stable. You know, like companies just, you know, $100 million one day and nothing the next day, and it's just, you know, someone walks in and everyone gets fired the next day. And there's lots of good video game journalism that kind of talks about that, and I think it's worthwhile looking at it. If you don't have the time and effort to go and search through all of those things, I'd say, a book like this is a really good way to sort of get a feel for it.
Have you got this as an audiobook? Or?
I got this as an audiobook, yeah. Which, again, is how I read most books,
Cool.
Yeah, and it's a fairly decent audiobook. Like, it's got a decent narrator. I'd sort of recommend it as an audiobook. So, and it's fairly entertaining, right? It's not it's designed for anyone, like a gaming fan, to pick up and read, right? It's not designed to be an industry, game developer thing.
Sure.
You don't need to know anything about it, right? It sort of explains what, it talks about the development of Diablo 3, and it tells you exactly what Diablo is and why it's good and stuff like that. It's actually a bit frustrating if you already know. But I definitely recommend it, because I do feel like a lot of people kind of want to work in games or whatever, and they don't really have any idea, what it's going to be like, like you were saying. And often games are very chaotic. It is this really weird blend of technology and sort of science and art and math and all these weird things, and it's sort of chaos normally ensues.
And one of those things that you learn pretty quickly is that if you're not working at one of the really big top tier companies, then sometimes those things are a bit chaotic, because the people even sort of running things might not know exactly how things are going to go. So there is some interesting things that go along. And you have to kind of just be prepared to kind of just sort of knuckle down and do your thing, and I guess not worry too much about some of those things. But sometimes it can make it a bit frustrating and difficult environment to work in.
Well, it talks about that. It's got all those sort of stories and different sort of things that happened and how that created total drama for everyone involved. And and so I feel like it's good to have a bit of an idea for that, because certainly I didn't really have a good feel for that when I started working in video games, and I don't think I stayed working in video games for very long, for sort of full time, and that sort of made me sort of want to go freelance. But yeah, it's really important to understand that. I mean, the same if you're interested in the movie industry or Hollywood, you need to know how those things work, right? The public facing image of a lot of these things is just total bullshit. It's just total fabrication. I say to everyone, people would sort of say, oh, you work in video games, and kind of people imagine like this studio where everyone's sitting there playing video games, there's like clowns everywhere, and people are playing ping pong ball and doing around. And the reality is it's mostly basically just a sea of desks with like people with headphones on just staring intently at monitors for like 12 hours a day.
That's all right.
Not talking to each other, by and large. It's not sort of some sort of crazy sort of thing. And the same with Hollywood. There's so many politics. People backstabbing each other. There's so much money involved. People do crazy stuff, insane stories. Once you actually hear what goes on behind the scenes. And I feel like if you get into the industry and some weird stuff happens, you're like, oh my god, this really? It's like, no, that happens every day. That's just the nature of the beast. So it's good to just know a bit of that stuff. And certainly if you want to have if you want to sort of start reading about, those sorts of issues, that's probably a really easy, palatable way to do it.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, let's get into let's
do some critiques.
Critiques.
Yeah, because everyone is finished, and everyone at CDW school is just about finished with all their work. So
that's right.
Everyone's kind of got things that they're handing up for final presentation, and they want feedback.
Yeah, so there's a bit of stuff here. So we're just going to go through, and some of these we don't.
Yep. And I have been giving critiques solidly for the last 6 hours.
yeah, I know. Yeah, and I saw you before, and I'm like, oh, you're going to come into the stream and do some more of that. Well, hopefully I can help you out a bit. And we can get through that stuff. So, there's a question. Just is the book mostly about like AAA companies, or does it mention some indie stuff as well?
No, it's got a mix. It's a very well considered book. You know what I mean? It talks about it has a list. If you look at the Amazon thing, it has a list of sort of the different titles, and I'd say primarily they're going to be AAA titles, because those are the things people are interested in hearing about. Diablo and sort of Destiny and you know, Halo Wars and, you know, all of these things, so people recognize them. But there's some stories of people, you know, making successful indie games and just the story behind that and stuff. So yeah,
awesome.
It's got a mix.
Sounds really cool, actually. Yeah, I have to check it out. So all right, let's get into some feedback. So I saw some people are throwing up some things. We'll try and get through all of it as best we can. There's quite a bit, so we'll see how we go. We'll try and spend, you know, kind of 5 minutes on each person's or so. Otherwise, we're going to really spend a lot of time doing this. But we'll see how we go. So Chan Lee has posted up an image that he's actually been doing for your class, Tim, or something that I don't know if you've seen this before or not.
No, I haven't seen this one before.
But yeah, so I think his sort of question is, oh sorry, just pressing the wrong keys here, is I was working on my last image for Create 101 on the side. I've been wondering about how to choose values when rendering a character.
Yeah.
I was also told that some of the details didn't fit with the rest of the image. What can I keep in mind to avoid this? Do you want to drive with this one?
You can drive.
Oh, I'll drive. Okay.
That's good to get someone else's feedback on stuff. But I mean, I can talk about stuff and you can sort of talk about what you do. I mean, to a certain degree, I'm not sure whether we need to sort of paint over this sort of image, but in terms of like how you sort of...
Maybe we could just draw over here?
Yeah, I mean... Well, I mean, just in terms of like logistically, the way that you really think about values is, you know, we teach whole classes on rendering and sort of value, but the number one thing is just figuring out where your light source is coming from. I think one of the issues is it sort of feels like you've got some sort of good rendering going on. There's some sort of good form being created. I think you have... There's not really a good solid idea of where the light's coming from, right? You can see like on the back of the head, there's that little sort of pipe, and that's giving us an indication of like a cast shadow.
Sure.
So it's important to kind of have that same level of kind of where's the light, figure out what the planes of your image are, and actually think about a value structure. The thing with the value structure is just making sure it's consistent, i.e. things fall from light to shadow at a consistent level. Again, there's lots of things we sort of talk about, you know, when it comes to that. I mean, halfway to black is the number one sort of thing we sort of, you know, mention, which is just a really simple way to kind of figure out how to transition from light to dark. You know, your shadows from your local color are halfway to black. So, you know, that's a good thing. But I think the number one thing here is I think that a lot of this is form rendering, not necessarily based on a light source. So, you know, if you want me to kind of talk about like sort of drawing, so we need to sort of think about like structurally how all of these forms are sort of constructed, and just actually go through it and sort of say like where is the light coming from, and at what point do these forms kind of change from being on one side, right, one plane, like if we think about this is like a cube or something, right, like this guy's got some weird thing in the front of his face, right, but if we're looking at this from above, right, obviously the top plane is going to be lit different from the 3/4 plane, is going to be lit different from the side plane, and that's really the basics of it all. That's the simplest thing to remember, is just try and say, well, like what the side of this face and all of the faces on his face, right, the facets of his face that are sort of facing the side are all going to be sort of a certain amount of darkness, and all of the sort of elements that are sort of facing the top are going to be a certain amount of lightness. And it's just a matter of kind of breaking things down in that way and not having things which are facing different directions that are the same value, right? So if things are facing different directions, and they're the same sort of local color, the same actual thing, then the value is going to change. So Simon's got an image of the sort of, you know, the classic sort of educational way to sort of look at this, if it's going to let us sort of paste it in, which is the Asaro head, which is just a sort of a 3D sort of cast that was made where, you know, someone sort of broke down the planes of the face. Might want to zoom up, make that as large as possible. And so this is sort of what we're talking about,
so I'm
right?
pretty sure the link to this is like planesofthehead.com.
Yep.
Right? And yeah, it's a guy called Asaro, right? That did that came up with this anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And there's nothing special about this head. It's just a head he made.
Yeah.
And everyone calls it, oh, it's the Asaro head, and it sort of has a mythical quality, and it's just a head someone made to kind of practice painting. But you can see very distinctly that the different planes of that face have different values, and that's the thing you want to kind of study and think about conceptually, is just you break down like the structure of whatever you're drawing into simple planes, and you can see that when you light it, those planes have relationships basically very much linked to where the light is hitting that plane and at what angle the light is hitting that plane. And obviously if the light is hitting that plane perpendicular, i.e. sort of straight on, it's going to light it up, you know, completely. But if it's hitting it like at an angle, right, so it's like not sort of perpendicular, it's like, you know, at an angle to the light, it's going to, you know, reflect less light. And it's that's super complicated, but that's the basics of it. You need to imagine the thing that you're drawing as a three-dimensional object and sort of logically just say, where is light on each form? So those fingers, for instance, right, are a cylindrical form. You can essentially break down a cylindrical form more or less to like a cube form and sort of say one side of that finger is going to be sort of darker than the top, or the side is going to be, you know, lighter than the top, depending on where the light is, and you just need to kind of keep that consistency. So if you were to,
even thinking about things kind of like at that basic level,
or just, you know, if we were sort of actually right, it's just sort of going through and sort of saying,
don't ask me what the brush this is. It's just some random
what brush is this? I don't even know what the keys are. I don't know what happened to the keys. I changed the keys and then they changed back. But yeah, you're just going to have to think about, you know,
I think they're different on here and then they're different on there.
Oh, right, because it's different keyboards. Yeah. So just with everything, right, you really need to sort of carve out and say, like, I've got sort of, you know, one plane here, and again sort of like one plane here, and this one is going to be darker than this one because, you know, it's not sort of receiving as much light. And the trick is just consistency. And that's why, like, last week we were kind of ranting and raving about knowing where your light source is. Do you know what I mean? Like, figure it out, because if you don't know where the light source is, you kind of can't progress with a lot of these things.
So I guess, Chandler, one of the things to do is maybe have a look at the planesofthehead.com and kind of think of some of that in your work here, and then how it applies to all the things as well, you know, in general, and maybe one of the things that you know, like someone was saying how, you know, some bits didn't fit together, is just making sure the things all look like they transition into each other, I guess. So making sure, like, you know, if you've got some, because you've got a lot of different elements, like there's feathers and there's metal and there's pipes and sort of like a jacket fabric and things like that. So it's just making sure all of those things kind of you know, kind of feel like they're connected in some way, you know, transitioning those details from one to the other. But I think
well, the other thing is, like, it's often, I think it's tricky if someone sort of says, someone said this about my art. I'm always like, who said that about your art? Because I've had these conversations with people where it's like, who said that about your art? It's like, oh, your friend. I'm like, I don't care what your friend said about your art. You know, maybe it was another teacher. I'm like, well, okay, but, you know, like, I don't know, I think it looks pretty cool. It's got a sort of, you know, like a modern sort of steampunk sort of, you know, like sort of anime vibe. It doesn't make any sense, but it's definitely like a creepy thing, you know. I think it's kind of cool, you know. I'm not too fussed about that. I think it's more just that kind of rendering and just getting things to read, you know, clearly and stuff. And I think that's part of the problem, right, as well. You know, if you're having trouble rendering different materials, I think that's often when it becomes more apparent that there's like multiple things going on. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Yes, Courtney is quoting Tim from last week about
Where
light sources.
Where is my fucking light source? Always got to remember, it's. I literally wrote that down at one point because I would always do it. I would just start painting, and I think this is because when I was sort of beginning, there wasn't a lot of sort of process stuff that really sort of talked about like when do you figure out where your light source is? Like what do you? I don't know, and I would just sort of. I would get halfway through a painting and I'd be like, oh my God, this is not working. And I'd just be fighting it and fighting it and fighting it and it's not working. And I'm just like, what am I doing wrong? And then I'd be like, do I know where my light source is? No.
Yeah.
How did I forget? Like, how did I forget? I knew, and I'd go through this process and I'd be like, okay, never forget. Like, how can I be so stupid? I've been trying to paint this thing and I just didn't, I tried to avoid it. Essentially, I tried to just skip it. And I was like, it'll be okay. I'll kind of figure it out. And then you get halfway through and it's like, I don't really know where it is. And I didn't consciously put it in there. Yeah. And often what happens is you start rendering the painting. You render one thing from one light source because it looks good that way. Another part of the body you render from another light source because it looks that way. One of the real things is that unless you pick the correct light source, right? Unless you position the light well, you will find that if you render something logically, often a lot of your stuff is going to be in shadow. And I think that's where the confusion comes, is people are like, well, if I follow this logically, this thing's in shadow and I can't even see my character's face. And it's like, well, yep, but that's where your light source is, right? Yep. So if you want to continue the painting, you kind of have to do that. Or you have to come up with some other fantasy light source that you can rationalize. Or you have to change the light source. Yeah, like that's, you kind of have to follow the logic. And I think that's one of the major challenges of illustration in general, is your composition is going to be dependent on the light source creating good shapes. But you kind of need to figure out where the light source is. Because obviously if you say, well, this creates a good shape here, logically it's also going to create different shapes there and they may or may not be good. And that's why really, really good illustrations are very tricky, because the person has sort of sat there doing multiple sketches saying like, just trying to work it around. How do I know? This is the one, and here's 5 where I kind of, I got this bit looking good, but then logically that would cast a shadow over here. And can I fake that? Can I live with that? No. Okay, let's try again, or maybe you can live with it and fudge it. And good luck with that. Don't ask me, because my answer is going to be figure out where it is. That's how you solve that problem. Basically, here be dragons. If you don't know where your light source is. If you're like, no, I'll be okay. Bye.
Just work it out.
Good luck.
All right.
Have fun.
So this is an image from Jim, one of our students as well, and is just doing a character design for The Witcher. So just character design, material breakdown below. Still having some trouble making character fit into the Witcher world. What else can I do? And then also, Jim has done a kind of like, sort of a sheet with materials and things on there. And this is something we kind of went over in class, which was to do. So I think the main thing I'd say about this one is that it's actually because of the way you've laid it out and stuff, the reference is taking over from the actual image. So you just want to be a bit more subtle about how you kind of like laying these things out, and a lot of it is even just the lines, these big red lines of things going all the way over here and stuff, right? I would just tone all that stuff down a bit, right? And just make it, this is probably going to be very difficult to do.
So I mean, other things you could do is like where we've kind of like just use that one. Where it's kind of like scribbled over. I feel like, again, that sort of stuff is there's probably a cleverer way you could do that.
It's just like kind of breaking the illusion of a nice presentation, right? So let's just kind of get rid of some of this stuff.
Yep. I mean, you could do it on the other one, I guess.
Yeah. Whoop.
It's too much gradient. No, the gradient's good.
But yeah, basically like actually even probably like red is just not the thing to do, but if you had
white would work fine.
Yeah. You just had something like that. And you could even go, let's do this, and use the old line tool, you know, and just having little things like that, right? You can see how much more subtle that is, right? And then it's just going to allow the image to kind of like just breathe a bit and be its own thing. And yes, these are supplementary, you know, these other things are supplementary pieces to the you know, to the 3D modeler or whoever is going to see it, and that would really help. So that's what I'd do, Jim, is like just tone those things down, right? Like it's all really good, just tone it down, yeah. And maybe with these things, don't, yeah, just like if you want to do this, like I mean, I'd just use the arrow from there to, you know, to this, right? And the person who's looking at it, it'll make sense to them. So remember, the people you're giving it to are not mentally challenged. They just want more information. So you know, just having that is going to be like, they'll go like, oh, this is for the shoulder pads, you know. So it doesn't need to be quite this like in your face.
Totally.
I guess.
And if you wanted a more stylish way to do that, you could easily just put a mask on the image that you're sort of, so you have a photo that you're sticking on top of the image. Just put a mask on that. Maybe make a quick selection with the lasso, and maybe sort of, you know, mask out, you know, by 50% or something, the bits of the image you don't want, so they'll sort of fade to the background. There's other ways you can sort of do that will be kind of easier and quicker and stuff like that.
Just as always, doing these things kind of tastefully, you know, just working on that stuff, and like all those design choices and things will come. They'll come with time. You'll learn how to do it and how to, you know, just become a bit better at that stuff. That's all. And in terms of the actual like character, I would say
you would probably know more because I have not played The Witcher. And
yeah, I'd just say like it's pretty cool, and I think that it probably just needs more attention to you know, kind of the costume, you know, the period of the costume and things. And it's just a matter of like getting the references for those things and trying to, you know, and trying to match those things up. So I would say like one of the other things is that it feels as though you could tuck the waist in a little bit more, like it's just getting a bit flat in that area, almost because it's too wide. Almost feels like it has no. Also,
if she's wearing like two belts, do you know what I mean? It seems like they are pretty much around her waist, i.e., like, you know, between bottom of the rib cage and the sort of the hip. So that isn't bone necessarily. So that's going to get pretty tight. So I would imagine that would probably get a little bit sort of tighter. Certainly you could play it. You could also play up your silhouette sort of pop with those, you know, with that.
So we're just doing everything in a longhand way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I feel like
I got the keyboard.
No,
we'll fix this during the break.
I fixed these keys and now they went back. So just get your, and I was talking about this today in character design. Even in the most sort of realistic things, right? What you see is what we're trying to create is this silhouette complexity that I think video games often really need to get that level of believability. You kind of need to create so much sort of silhouette breakup to definitely say this is not flat, because it's still flat, right? Even with sort of you've got sort of like normal maps and a lot of those things, you know, the geometry itself, right, it's not actually sort of, you know, like detailed. So often a lot of these things sort of get, if you look at how things transition to in-game sort of models, things often get sort of rounded off a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Because you kind of have low geometry meshes. you know, so like
what they can do for sure.
You kind of don't. Things get softened a little bit, and so that's why the more you kind of focus on good silhouette, the better things are going to be. Even on, you know, a realistic game like The Witcher or Call of Duty or something like that, we're going to want to have as much of this kind of like silhouette breakup, right? Like where we sort of have like transition between, right, different materials. So we've sort of got like one material, then we've got this other sort of material, then we've got sort of like the skin, right? Just making sure that that's really clear, because that's the sort of thing that's going to show in the game, you know.
Yep.
And that's part of what you're sort of designing.
And one of the other things I've been talking to Jim a bit about is just, and she's getting better at it, is just getting, like, having the values a bit too muddy, you know, or the colors a bit too muddy, and just trying to get away from getting to black too early. And this is a continual improvement, so just keep working on that stuff, because we're getting a bit getting a bit kind of, you know, black in the face and things. Just getting there too quickly, so then you got no kind of wiggle room to go into, and then things start to get a bit mush.
You want to make sure you're very conscious of the values that you use, so that you're reserving those last darkest darks for things that are actually dark. The other thing I'd say is that one of the things you find is that, you know, people with darker skin are typically going to look like, you know, their sort of internal silhouette is better designed if you do give them some sort of lighter colors to kind of pop off. So, you know, often, you know, like certain sort of costumes and things, like people will wear different colors depending on their sort of skin tone, you know, because certain things sort of look better with certain skin tones. And, you know, like that's just sort of like a natural thing that people will sort of do just to style themselves. So, you know, it can be sort of worth, you know, like you notice like the model there with the dark skin. So she's got that really great sort of like, you know, sort of brown skin. You can see lots of sort of form, but it's kind of, you know, you can see she's wearing, like, she's against a white background, and she's got like a white sort of top on, right?
Yeah, and it creates like lots of contrast.
And that's what's creating the contrast, right? Whereas you know, that typically, you know, like someone with a lighter skin color is going to have like a darker kind of, you know, sort of costume on to sort of balance it. Not necessarily, right? But, you know, that's sort of what you sort of tend to do, and people will just naturally sort of do that. They'll kind of, you know, because there's a huge spectrum of skin color, right? And you'll find that depending on, you know, exactly kind of what time of year you've got a tan or a not tan, some things kind of, you know, look better or sort of not quite as good, because it's just contrast, right? Like that's what you're trying to do, is sort of pop up, you know, like different sort of values and different sort of colors. Yeah, so just always think about that. It's not just us designing, but you have to think about the character themselves, right? Like they're going to try and create a certain sort of aesthetic where just naturally you have contrast. So like, oh, my face sort of, you know, pops out. So always think about that as much as possible.
And I think some of the other things that could be cool is like, you know, this like kind of dress here, or I guess cloak, is really cool with this like two-tone kind of, you know, thing going on. So there's some bits you can kind of work into your painting a bit, and you can see the two kind of belt thing. You can kind of see how in the reference we can't see it all, but basically you can see in here where, sorry, I know you guys can't sort of see the cursor on the screen, but like in here you can actually see that. Let's just draw over it so you guys can see.
You're talking about the waist is tucking in. Yeah.
So like the waist, oh, this is taking way too long. The waist is actually, the waist is actually like tucking in here kind of thing. And these, like Tim was saying, these belts are in a slightly different location than what you've drawn them.
So those belts are resting kind of like below the sort of the hip, essentially. So they're sort of like on the hip, not on the waist. So
and I think that just might be the bit that's thrown Jim in, like, you know, how she's kind of like drawn them, you know, in this spot here. Right. So yeah, it's just kind of like paying attention to that reference and stuff, and just knowing some of the structures and how those things go. Yeah. But I think what's kind of cool is like the light source and stuff. Like, you know, kind of we've been talking about that, but in this one, the light source is working reasonably well in terms of it's considered, and those things are kind of happening and stuff. And I just think, just with the colors, just try not to get to black too quick. Just save it, save it for later, and just try to look at like Tim said, look at this kind of reference, you know, and use these tones that are kind of happening. You can see, like, even in, you know, under the real dark areas are not until right underneath that jaw, the kind of bone right there, you know, and even in here, you know, it's not getting to black, and even, you know, like, it's just looking at the reference and kind of like going, what's it actually doing? But
it's looking cool.
Pretty cool. All right. Okay, let's have a look at Sarah. And I think you have Sarah in one of your classes. This is a lineup working on for my honors project, where I'm using Norse mythology as a base for a science fantasy alien world where magic and technology happily live side by side. I'm not sure on the height of the light elf. I want them to be tall, but I feel like she's now towering over the Valkyrie. The Vayner are average human height. Any other feedback is also welcome. So, I think I actually like. Maybe she's towering over, but it doesn't seem too, like, it's not too crazy that it's like out of control.
Yeah. Well, again, I think a lot of the key is it's not just a matter of like scaling up sort of characters. Is that people who have, certainly like humans who have different sort of height characteristics tend to be associated with different sort of body types, which is not necessarily always true. You know, you've got like the lady who plays like Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones, do you know what I mean, who's just sort of like large, right? Like, she's just kind of like a large person. Whereas, you know, you would have, and she's like a certain height, right? And that's like that is a particular sort of type of sort of like size. Like, you know, you also see that with some like males where they're just kind of big, right? It's just everything's scaled up. And, you know, that's sort of something. But one of the things you need to pay attention to with this sort of thing are things like eye size, head size, hand size, right? Like those, like things that sort of aren't likely to get that much bigger or smaller, right? So, you know, like eyes aren't going to be that much bigger or smaller, you know, from sort of person to person. Like, I mean, the actual eyeball, not the physical sort of, you know, like shape that you see. So, that's something that's really important to pay attention to, is the head size. And also just like what kind of physical type are they? Are they just like a scaled up human, or are they more like sort of, you know, someone who's tall, who's like, you know, like skinnier, right? Because again, there's lots of like tall, skinny people who have real trouble putting on muscle, real trouble putting on fat, do you know what I mean? They just have like fast metabolisms, and they've got certain types of physical characteristics, right? They're going to have sort of, you know, like sort of wider shoulders typically. You often see frequently like quite wide shoulders, quite narrow sort of legs, just sort of like tall, fairly lean. You know, that's often, you know, like an archetype, and especially if you're talking about the elf, like that's sort of partly where that sort of archetype goes. So a lot of it is a matter of sort of looking at the proportions of that sort of person, right? Like what's actually sort of happening, how wide are the shoulders versus the hips versus the head, that sort of thing. And figuring out, is the head actually bigger? Because that will make them feel different. You know?
And a lot of times on like kind of quite tall people, it's the legs, right, that are kind of, because I know that you can have that thing where kind of people are sort of like sitting down in a chair and everyone's like kind of relatively the same height, but then when they stand up, they're like a lot taller than the person who they're sitting next to. You know, so I think sometimes it can be sort of just lifting that waist, you know, and having those longer legs and things like that. And I think like to some degree, like some of that is happening in this. So there's some good things there going on. The other thing probably is like just making sure that their feet are all kind of like, you know, are all sort of lining up in terms of like where they're sitting on the ground, because that's going to be like a big
because they are kind of moving up a little bit.
So like here, this, you know, they're kind of like, this is a little bit sort of different
Yep. And that's why often those model sheets are so uniform, right? Is because that you kind of need to tell that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you sort of do the lineup and then you do the model sheet and then you sort of put them together in an actual
it's like,
sort of thing, and it's like, oh, they're actually
yeah.
Yeah. But this is the kind of stuff you sort of deal with a lineup, right? Is like changing those subtleties, and really kind of thinking about like how those lines are going to work. You know, like what's going to be the difference between these characters. But yeah, like, you know, for instance, if you look at like the big sort of creature, what is he? The name? What's the name underneath? If you scroll up, yeah, right. So the Jotun is like, his head is quite big, which kind of makes him look, again, a bit more like just a scaled up sort of human.
Yep.
You know, whereas if his head was like maybe a little bit sort of smaller, then it would make him feel bigger, right? So and that's often you know, it is a matter of sort of placing characters next to each other. The one thing I will say, I don't know what she's going to do with the honors project, but I have certainly regretted making characters too much smaller or bigger than each other in a comic book, for instance. Right? So like Pinocchio is like a classic example of having like various heights, because and actually Seven Pirates was a similar thing where I kind of made like because in character design they say like make sure everyone's a different height so you can see them and make sure the silhouette is different.
Yep.
It makes it really difficult to just sort of have a shot of three people talking if one of them is like significantly shorter than the other, because you kind of can't just do a simple straight on shot where you can see all their heads.
You have to like kind of make a whole bunch of crazy stuff up.
Yeah, you kind of have to, you know, like shoot it from a specific angle. So it's not always, you know, or just maybe think about that. It's like how much bigger you sort of want people to be and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, you probably need to make his neck a bit bigger and stuff like that. His head is, I feel like his head is a bit small, but you can see that just having his head that
like
small,
just changing it, right,
makes him feel like, wow, he is now huge, you know.
It kind of totally changes the vibe of him around, right? Yeah. So actually, I guess that's to your point, is you probably don't need to make him quite as tall, you know, if you just kind of make the head proportionate. A lot of it is you can make him bigger using
like wider,
different kind of means. I
always
find like those, you know, to make those characters feel really big and broad, they tend to have like kind of like you were saying before, sort of little narrow legs. You know, it makes the upper body feel bigger as well. So kind of, I guess, you know, sort of thinking like, you know, the feet can be a bit bigger, but they're not like, you know, size 28 bigger, you know, they're just like size 15 or something, you know what I mean? The
other thing I'd say is if she did want to keep his head the same size, so if you take off those changes, if you undo those things, I think one of the main things I'd do is I'd make his hands bigger, because people who are going to have that kind of larger frame, you know, you want him to be that sort of blacksmith style frame. You know, you want them to have like sort of big hands. Do you know what I mean? Like they're big, their hands are big. And that's a thing where, you know, if you sort of see, you know, like hands next to each other and one is like much bigger, that immediately kind of rationalizes the size a little bit. So that's something you can sort of do. Do you know what I mean? If you want someone to appear like sort of really solid. Whereas someone who's kind of more dainty is going to have like sort of like smaller, sort of longer hands, right? But if you want someone to be like sort of orcish, right? Like have that sort of slightly barbarian sort of hand, maybe that's maybe a little bit big, but it's hard to do it on that computer. So that's just like playing around with those sorts of things. I think will kind of help, but I think it's looking pretty cool. I think it looks cool. And as far as the Norse stuff, I think that just some more reference of like the Norse, you know, symbols and potentially like the materials they were using and stuff like that. Like I think that's probably what you need to do, Sarah, is just like, you know, almost like what Jim was doing with this one here. You know, with the model, you know, with these references and things, have a think about that, Sarah, and like how you can incorporate that stuff into your
into these, and that'll probably help you work on the details and stuff. And how you get these, and how to like kind of render it and how to add more details into things. Because that's probably something that you want to start doing as well. So
I think the detail, like I think she just has this kind of like a sort of simpler, more sort of cartoony style.
Sure.
I think what I'd say if you are going to like make stuff more sci-fi or magical, but you're using the Norse mythology, you need to sort of link it in some way so that there is that carry through of the iconography. So you have like sort of Celtic knots. You've got their kind of like icons, jewelry, the things that they would wear, the cloaks. You need to kind of say, well, how can I make something sci-fi that feels like that, right? Because I feel like some of the Valkyrie sort of stuff, like it's a bit maybe Roman. Right, it's like a matter of sort of really digging into that sort of stuff, and she's got the kind of like the triangular Celtic knot, sort of thing. Like I think some of that's happening, but I feel like because it's so simple, you kind of need to really be sort of as obvious as
just
possible.
Kind of ramp it up a bit.
I think a little bit more, right? Because the thing with the Celtic knot is that it's the repetition, right? Like it's the detail and repetition of it that makes it, not as like an iconic thing, but they have those sort of bands of Celtic knot.
Yeah. And you've got it here, like you've got the logo in the you've got the logo in here, but it's not really showing up anywhere in the actual designs. I guess so. It'd be good to incorporate that kind of stuff more, right? In the knee pads or in the, and once again you like look at reference as to like where to put that stuff as well, where they have more of those kind of things, whether it's the patterning or sort of like logo-ish type things.
It's a very specific thing, and I feel like a lot of the icons here are close. They're sort of a cross. But I mean I know because I was drawing that Thor thing, I had to figure out how to draw Celtic knots. It's pretty annoying.
Because they're complicated.
It's kind of like
wrapping around.
They're wrapping around everywhere. It's kind of a bit of a nightmare actually. But there is a specific iconography where it's not just crossing over, but it's the crossing over and continual sort of crossing over. And that it's not just a cross, right? It's kind of like a very specific thing,
interlocking sort of.
It's and it's so if you can get even a little bit of that in there, it'll instantly feel Celtic and sort of like have that sort of mythological sort of vibe. So that's all I'd say. It's just like but I think like she's very much trying to. The problem is like you could say, let's make the belt have Celtic knots on it, but that doesn't work with the style. Do you know what I mean? It's more like an animated cartoon sort of style, or something like that. Sort of very simple. So you have to kind of get it into those large graphic sort of elements, which is quite tricky. It actually does take a lot of revision and sort of playing around to be like, how do I get a single Celtic knot into that iconic sort of breastplate so that it all kind of works properly. But no, I think it's looking pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Well, there's some feedback, Sarah, so hopefully that helps a little bit. And if you have any other questions, just please let us know. Let's move on to Darcy's here. I still haven't worked out what keys are what on here. But we'll get there, guys. We are very much just flying by the seat of our pants here, but we'll work it out. So
that's the only way to fly.
So this is a image from Darcy for Design Fundamentals, and it's a ship, and just wants some feedback before he starts rendering. So yeah, I mean, firstly, I'll say like it looks pretty cool. Like overall, I think that all the the kind of overall like structure of the drawing and everything feels pretty good. So that's pretty cool. Yeah,
you could certainly render that.
Yeah. And I think for you, Darcy, like I always know that. So yeah, for you guys that are sort of tuning into the stream, but a lot of these people that are submitting things are our students, and we kind of know them, know their tendencies, and things like that. So Darcy, one of yours is kind of getting things finished. So so when you do kind of get into this rendering and things,
or the lack thereof, is that?
Well, is when you get into rendering these things, you want to really start paying attention to those details and stuff. So it looks like you've kind of got some good form lines and things here. You also have some lines that are kind of confusing. So, you know, there's a lot of these hang on, we need to draw in here because I know you guys can't actually see the cursor. Oh god. What's going on? Don't you love that when you use the Wacom tablet and it does stuff when you
just it's lagging.
Yeah. So, you know, things like this, you know, these kind of shapes here, right? These lines. You know, I don't know. This one's kind of okay because it sort of has some stuff here that, but I think
make sure you know what that is.
Yes,
if that is something,
because some of these things are kind of confusing. You know, like as in you might start rendering some bits and they're gonna just throw you off. So, you know, these lines around here, you know, are great, and I can see that you're starting to like think about some of these like secondary forms here, which is excellent. And you just need to make sure that that all kind of carries through everywhere. So you're kind of working out what exactly this kind of shape does, and kind of almost like the Asaro head that we were talking about before.
Exactly like the Asaro head.
Yeah, not almost exactly. Yeah, is thinking about like how, you know, how these forms are working in space, and then how you render these, and where the plane is changing, and then on this curved surface, it's like thinking about how you transition that change, you know. And this is kind of starting to become like a cylinder, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you find is that like one of the primary things is we've sort of got like, if I'm sort of imagining what I think is happening with these forms, should we zoom up?
Sure.
Just as an example, right? Like zooming up here. We'll see if we can undo. What is undoing?
It was this before.
Anyway, I'll keep going. I'll do it over here. So we've got a top plane here that seems to curve. This plane here seems to curve. Then we've got a separation in here. Then this one is curving over as well. And then this is like another curve, maybe, right? So what you'll find is, like, for instance, this line here this line's just going straight to here. So you've got this cut line that's kind of just going, but this line here that's part of the construction indicates that maybe there is some sort of differentiation,
change in the form,
and that's the kind of stuff that sounds like I'm just sitting there like nitpicking, and you're just like, really, dude? You're picking on the line? God damn it! Look at my awesome helicopter. You know, it's pretty cool, and I'm just like ripping it apart and saying, you see this line here? This is like 2 millimeters off here. But that's the kind of stuff that will just totally ruin your day. Once you start
and if
rendering.
you get it wrong in one place, it starts messing with your head, and you don't know where to fix it, and then you start chasing yourself.
You start
chasing the
literally because it's one of these things where you start rendering based on one thing, and then you'll be like, oh wait, where is that? So it's really good to do some of these sort of cross-sectional things just in your mind and kind of really figure out, like, because here we've got this line which sort of comes over here, but this one is not quite in perspective. Do you know what I mean? And then this is sort of curving, but like, does this one curve? Right? It seems like it sort of curves, but it's really important to know, like, where, like, at what point does it curve? At what point does it stop curving? Right? This looks like it's kind of slinking around here, but is it straight? Do you know what I mean? Really figure out, like, is this plane straight, or is it like that? Like, what? Because this indicates that it's kind of like this, right? This is kind of indicating. So I think there's like some cut lines that have sort of been drawn. There's also these underlying construction lines, which seem like they're very important because you're basing some stuff on it. But it's really just a matter of, like, go through, do some of this cross-sectional stuff where you're kind of like, just figure it out, and you can hide that on a separate layer and just sort of reference it, because that's the sort of thing that will allow you to get what we need, which is a different gradient for this thing, right? Then a different one for this one, right? This is not just going to be a different value, but a different kind of curvature.
That's right.
And then different value for this, different value for this, different value for this, different value for this. So you've got like sort of 1, 2, right? And then you've sort of got like a curve gradient, maybe it's sort of 3, 4 values, right? We got 5, we got 6, you know, sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
My brain's starting to explode, Tim.
That's how many different facets you're going to have to know are different. If you just kind of go, oh, these are all the same, that's when it starts to look flat, right? Yep. So it's just a matter of understanding, like those Asaro heads, when you actually break things down, which is sort of what you do before you make things kind of like smoother conceptually, that you kind of just need to know. So that's what I'm saying, is I'm saying what you need to do is in your mind know that these are different values you're going to need to know.
Yep.
Before you start, not before you start rendering, but as you start rendering, if you execute that properly, those will all be sort of different.
Yeah, and what's really cool is, sorry, I'm trying to find a good little reference image on the internet, but not having much luck, is that you know, if you look at these kind of you know, helicopters or submarines or whatever the case may be,
it's like a Russian Hind
helicopter
or something like that. It's sort of very similar to that, sort of has that Russian sort of like bobbly sort of stuff on top, and you know, the sort of more details underneath. Yeah, and I think the other thing is also, it's important to realize, we were talking about like doing perspective and adding detail and stuff like that. It's important to understand that there's probably not enough really fine detail in this image. Not enough little greeblies and little details of, like, you know, the landing gear, the smaller little bits and pieces, sensors, smaller panel lines, cut lines, to make it feel super realistic. So you have to be aware of the expectation, right? Is if you render it up, you can only render to the amount of detail that your you know, sort of line drawing will allow. So if you look at, you know, I think Simon's got like an image up here of, like, you know, an actual kind of helicopter. So you just look at like the amount of sort of stuff there is on it, a lot of which we probably have no idea what it is. Again, a lot of it's sort of radars, sensors, you know, bits and pieces to make sure that you can sense people and you don't crash, and, you know, engine, everything's got a purpose there, but there's that fine level of detail that the drawing that he had just doesn't have, and that's fine, right? Because you can still use it as a rendering exercise, but it's just important to understand that that's what will give you that feeling of like realistic military complexity.
And I think what's really important to look at when you see this stuff, and this is amazing because this is the most helpful bit of this reference, is that all these little pieces let's try and draw a straight line. Hitting a tablet on the angle is not good. So all these little pieces, what they're doing is they're describing the form, right? They're describing, look at all these bits, rivets, and they're showing that that's a curved surface, right? This one is showing that that surface is less curved here. You know, you've got these horizontal lines that are showing, you know, the form that way, and the perspective. You got these ones, right? Like all these little details are actually like informing us how this image goes.
Yeah,
right.
It's almost like you're in a little grid.
Yeah, so almost these are pretty much the contour lines that Tim was drawing over the image, right? Like you've got a line here that shows that's the contour of the form, and then this is like a cut line showing like a different angle. You know, the piece of metal is actually cut at a different angle to the actual form that it's going, right? So it's just, look at the reference, and this stuff is really gonna be really informative. You know, if you look at this stuff and you kind of translate it onto yours, it's kind of like, you can still go wrong, but it makes it easier to kind of do it on your version. So if we have a look at this, Darcy, you know, like all these lines that Tim's basically drawing over the top is really, you can sort of go like, these are rivets. There's like on the reference, you know, there's panels that do this, and all those little bits and pieces are going to like describe the form. So you put like the little bits in, and and if you look at the reference and then try and translate into drawing, it tends to make it a little bit easier. You always get these kind of weird, you know, hard bits to kind of describe, you know, like, but you've just got to try your best, you know, and look at the reference.
It's where like one sort of major form of an object morphs into another form. And someone's kind of had to say, oh, let's make these meet with some weird metal sort of like shape.
Convoluted shape that's difficult to draw. But once again, like, you just look at reference for those things, and it should like kind of resolve itself. So that's what I say, Darcy, is like look at the reference for this kind of stuff, then translate it onto your drawing, and then start rendering, and just make sure that the things that you're doing well, like show through in the image. The bits. It's kind of like Tim was saying, like what happens here, and then and what's this piece of metal? It's just little things like that when you look into it. Overall, looks really good. So it's just those kind of like secondary, tertiary details.
Those are just things that are going to come up as you render it, right? Yep. And I just want to reiterate that by like drawing many different numbers, many of these numbers are going to be the actual value for these numbers in terms of light and dark are going to be the same.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that like you're going to need to be like, what's number 10, right? Oh, it's kind of facing the side. Okay, so that's going to maybe be like a similar value to this plane, which is sort of facing the side. This plane is sort of facing the top, right? Yep. So that's going to be maybe a bit similar to kind of, this plane, which is kind of close, but it'll be sort of, this will be a bit darker.
So you're not saying it's a 10 value or a 11 value.
No, there's not like 12 values, but yeah, you're going to have to conceptually know that's how many different facets there are. And if you're just kind of saying, oh, there's only one or two, you're not going to get that level of complexity. Yep. So that's why it's important to kind of, if you can't conceptually draw those lines, those cut lines as part of the construction, it's going to be very difficult to render based upon them.
Yeah. So and the biggest thing, Darcy, is if things are getting too complicated, just simplify them. Just make it a simple shape, make it a cube or a sphere, and try and just work out, or a cylinder, and just work out how that fits in, to the image. Look at the reference, and then think about your drawing and think about like what that shape is, and try and just fit it in, and then work on the connection points and stuff. But I think it's good. It's just it's just those more
those main forms are there.
Yep.
They look really solid.
Yep.
That's honestly one of the hardest bits. So yeah, it should be good. I just have a go at rendering it and see what happens, I guess.
All right. So let's have a look at George.
Cool. Dragons.
Yep. So George has been modeling a dragon. This is for a creature design class.
Who's this with?
This is with Nick Peel.
With Nick Peel.
Yeah.
Cool.
And basically the task here is to focus mostly on the head, and then kind of getting into the body and things like that. So George is obviously taking the body a little bit further and things, and then just trying to get the head sculpt looking as good as possible. So once again, I think there's some really good stuff going on, George. We've kind of spoken about this in class a bit as well, and I think there's lots of really cool stuff. We spoke a little bit about being like stylized versus simplistic kind of thing. So I think George kind of wanted this to be a little bit kind of he wanted it to be a little bit stylistic, right? But was just having trouble sort of how the kind of getting some sense of believability into it whilst it's still being kind of stylized. Yeah. And I think for students that can be really quite a difficult challenge, sometimes. Sort of like you don't want to make it look low poly, but you want it to have a sense of style to it. But I think sometimes when you're starting out, it just tends to look a bit low poly rather than stylized. If that makes sense. So it's just kind of working on those things. And what I'd say, like George, is the things where, just what's, let's just draw on the right layer here.
I need to go up because we're below.
Oh, yes. Sorry. There we go. Make a new layer, please. So basically, once again, like some of the other guys, it's just working on like the transitions and things and like what's going on in here. Because at the moment, these are sort of like blobby shapes, right? And they don't really have any... I don't know if one's in front of the other or one's on top of the other or how they kind of like fit. And then sort of like how they connect in to the head here is very like harsh. So, it's good to like really look at the reference for, how this could kind of like, fit in, right? And kind of like what we've been talking about with the drawings is like really thinking about the form, and getting your details to kind of like really show the form off, I guess. So looking at goat horns and bison horns and some of the textures that they have and the kind of like ribbing details on them. They have like these crazy connections into the head and stuff sometimes, like where they. So I'd look at the reference, look at where the horn, connects into the head and what is happening in this point here, right? Because that's what's going to kind of that's the bit where you can have fun with all the kind of like little details and things like that. You have like different kind of textures and things. And in ZBrush, like you can sculpt all that stuff, right? Like you can go crazy with those things. In terms of like the body and stuff, it's a similar thing, right? In terms of this at the moment, just feels like it's like, how does it connect in? It feels like a sphere in ZBrush that's just been extruded out. Like that's what it feels like. You just got the circle and just go zoop. And it's like, here goes an arm, right?
Do you want me to do a draw over?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
I can go pretty crazy with this if you want.
And it's more just working on like kind of the anatomy and those.
Let me try and change the keyboard first, because I feel like it's going to be. Is it going to tell us which keyboard? Or is it not going to allow us to do that?
I don't know. Keyboard. Maybe just go keyboard and go modify keys and see what it says.
Yeah, we are.
I think maybe when you unplugged it, it swapped back to the. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties.
Yeah, this happens. This is my life. Oh, now I can navigate. Awesome. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna select. You're one of those people who uses the polygonal lasso tool. This is Simon's actual computer.
It's because I've been painting buildings, Tim.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to make this sort of as big as I can, so that I can sort of draw over it as much as possible. So I'm not going to do much of the wing, but just as an example of kind of like how much we sort of like want to start thinking about. I think it also did this is the other thing you've got to do. System preferences, we have shortcuts, and I think it's like Spotlight, or is it going to be like Siri? How do we turn off?
Yeah, I don't know. We can work out the break though. Don't worry about it for now.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, it's like when I hold down on all these Macs, whenever I hold down a certain key, it sort of like opens up sort of Spotlight or something like that. All right, so there we go. That's what it's doing. Where are we? New layer. Let's fill it with white. Reduce the opacity. Now I can draw over it and do a drawing. So
even though you've modeled this in 3D, George, like, what Tim's going to show you now with the draw over is not necessarily like he doesn't want you to draw over it. He just wants you to think about these things when you're designing it.
One of the things you have to do if you're doing dragon anatomy is you actually have to learn about dragon anatomy, because there's many different ways you can sort of do it. But what we want to conceptually do is just think about, I mean, the first thing I'd say if you have such a long tail, I think we need like a longer neck, right? Like that's one of the primary things that I feel like is going to be sort of, but just think about like all like animals with a spine, right? Have a spine. You can like, this is just sort of basic logic. All sort of like vertebrates have this, and so you would have sort of like spinal sort of column going along the back, right? And at some point you can see like we've got this sort of chest.
I feel like this is going to turn into Dragon Lesson 101, people.
Oh, it is, yeah. Well, that's all right. Just an example.
Okay, I'm pretty sure everyone's keen for this, Tim.
Just like how you would sort of solve these problems, right? Because this stuff happens all the time. So what happens is we sort of have like chest cavity, and this is where all of the organs are kept, and this is the same on every sort of animal that's even remotely like this. And then you kind of have sort of like hips, right? And that's often sort of like attached to the spine, right? And you can see like human anatomy is exactly the same. I'm not going to do actual dragon like crazy anatomy. I'm just sort of saying like these are the sort of things we need to think about. We have sort of like hips, right, where you've kind of got like your sort of like femur right, sort of coming out. And what you need to think about is, you know, you can sort of look very much at sort of like animal sort of anatomy for the legs, right? But I mean, one of the key sort of things you'll be sort of thinking about is just figuring out how the transition happens up here. Like, where are these muscles attaching to? Up here, right? So you're going to have the transition is kind of where do muscles attach to up near the torso, because that's what's going to define everything. So typically what you have is we have some kind of like shoulder blade, right? And then we have and that kind of allows sort of rotation around the torso. And then you have your kind of arm bone. And the trick is that here you've basically got the hand bone, right? Where we've got with sort of
high fives.
Yep, pretty much. 1, 2, 3, right? So what we need here is some logical thing where obviously it's not just a straight line. That's the first thing, is it's not just a straight line and a flap, because that's like a bird isn't even like that.
Yep.
What you need to do is sort of rationalize what's happening here. So like one of the things you kind of find with like sort of, you know, like horses and those sorts of things is that that sort of shoulder blade sort of thing is more on the side. Do you know what I mean? Like if you look at sort of cows, like they've got that real kind of thing coming down,
it kind of like really comes up.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't really need to think about that, and I could go into more detail if we sort of wanted. But the real key,
if required,
if
real anyone's going to ask questions,
is just that we can sort of get this out a little bit from here, and that basically at base we want some sort of elbow joint thing, right? And then what we have to do is rationalize how these muscles here are sort of attached to the thing. And again, we don't have to go crazy.
And once again, that's kind of the transition, right? That's the bit where it goes from kind of like the kind of upper shoulder into the actual body. And
so you're sort of looking at the armpit, right? And so what we've got is we've got sort of like a bone or sort of muscle going here. And what sort of essentially happens is you've got, like with you, is we have pecs, which basically wrap and lock that shoulder or that like rotational thing and sort of attach it to the rib cage, right? So we have things that sort of like stretch around here somewhere, right? That are going to sort of allow movement this way and this way. And we also have like sort of lats, which essentially attach to your sort of back, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to have like a mass of muscles kind of here. And obviously also we've got sort of like the shoulder, right? Which is where that's sort of, your sort of deltoids are sort of to a certain degree attaching to your sort of like clavicle and, you know, your sort of collarbone and your shoulder blade, right? So having essentially, you don't have to go crazy with anatomy, but we have sort of three major shapes that are going to be important. One is just the major sort of, you know, bicep, arm, tricep thing. Doesn't have to be like that. And that's probably going to sort of create movement here. But you're going to have three main groups. One is kind of the pectoral, or like the fantasy pectoral thing. And that's going to connect to the rib, right? And our ribs are kind of like here. So you could essentially kind of say these pectoral muscles can sort of wrap and go to, you know, anywhere on that sort of rib cage, right? And so what we're looking for is resolution of lines.
Yeah. And a bit of gesture in there and stuff as well.
Yeah, like where would be a cool line, right? Like how would this sort of work? And then that's what sort of allows that sort of like the push, right? But you also want lats under there, and again, they're gonna sort of connect more to like the back, right? And then what you're going to probably see is some kind of like underarm thing, and you just kind of look at human anatomy for like what sort of an underarm sort of looks like, which is a fairly unique sort of anatomical thing, you know, where you have this sort of cavity there. but you've also got the deltoid, which is sort of a mass on top that's going to allow that kind of like up rotation. That's so it's that kind of thing where you can sort of move around. If you don't have three main bunches of shape there, right, and they're not sort of distinct, if you don't have something which is kind of a muscle, like a group of muscles that's attaching to your sort of like sternum, right, it's just not going to feel right. It's going to feel really weird. You can do this completely differently as if it's a four-legged creature. You've seen sort of like things like that. That's sort of different. I'm doing like more of like a human anatomy one, and there's different sort of ones. And
different types.
And this could literally go for hours and hours and hours.
But what's really cool, I think, for George, right, who's doing it in ZBrush and may not be as confident in drawing this stuff because he's one of the 3D students. But like essentially what he needs to be thinking about is like they should be lumps of clay that is kind of like building up to create these masses of areas that are essentially making the character look, you know, believable and functional, all those things. And what I think is really cool to see for all of you guys that are checking out the stream and stuff is that just Tim drawing over those like elements and kind of talking about them, it looks like the thing is now going to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's what you want to go for is like, you know, how do I get it from being just you know, like a cylinder into you know, into like another cylinder. It's like, how do I get those shapes working? Well, this is how you get them working, is like looking at the anatomy of real kind of things. Tim's making some stuff up, right? Because it's a dragon, you got to
it's a dragon, you have to.
Some bits.
You have to, because you know, like animals which are four-legged don't lift their arms that much. Do you know what I mean? Like a cat doesn't do a lot of this. You know? It sort of can, but it doesn't do a lot of that. You know, like cows don't go like that. You know, it's
because a lot of times their arms are coming out from underneath and stuff. Legs.
Like and it looks like that. It looks like the thing is like that, but it's because the shoulder blades are on the side of the rib
so they
cage,
can't go up. They can only.
Whereas ours are on the back, and that's because it's all sort of, you know, we're all based on very common sort of ancestors or something like that. But the key is it's like there's different levels of this, right? And ultimately you want to be able to do comparative anatomy of, like, you know, quadrupeds, you know, like bipeds, you know, fantasy creatures, and, you know, like there's lots of different ways to solve this idea of a giant snake that flies, right? Because one of the keys is you can sort of look at like bat anatomy. But the thing is, bats are really light. Birds are really light.
Dragon's like a flying horse.
Or as well like a flying elephant, right? So you have to sort of, maybe if that's your thing, if you're not sort of fantasy rationalizing, well, no, dragons have magical hollow bones like birds do. So it only weighs like, you know, a ton, even though it's as big as, you know, 20 elephants. You have to kind of say, well, do I want like the biggest, most ridiculous bodybuilder style arms that could actually potentially push that much air, you know? So that's one way of doing it. Or you can do more like a woven sort of style, you know, like sort of dragon, which is more like a small sort of like whippy little dragon. But those big ones, which it seems like that is a bit like that. You probably want to rationalize the muscle. So, you know, like artists, there's a lot of artists who are quite good at that. You know, I think like Todd Lockwood is quite good at drawing those like really sort of chunky sort of dragons. So just look at that and look at how people have solved it, because there's particular artists who draw a lot of dragons and like they've figured out where those muscles goes for them.
And it's certainly stuff, George, that you've been told in class is these are things that you can do. So just pay attention to those things and really try and like work out how you can incorporate it into your workflow. But I think that's really awesome, Tim. So
and again, like you can keep going to the other one, but there's different levels, right? The first level is just, you need to have like basic muscle groups that are going to create opposing forces. And if you don't have that, it will feel like the thing can't actually move. That's the key. So ultimately you want to be able to know all this stuff, but at the base, just think like, okay, I'm a human. I need a big lump of muscles that's a pectoral, a big lump that's like a shoulder sort of deltoid, and a big lump that's kind of like lats. And if you don't have that, it's not going to feel like the character can kind of like have articulation.
So all right, well, let's move on to the next one.
Cool.
Basically here I'm just going to try and find some reference for this, hopefully really quickly. Let's have a look here.
So this is for UE4 3D prop modeling.
and we've got kind of the initial reference images here, which could be helpful.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So this is basically like the concept that the class is working off, and this is for environment and prop modeling. And basically, Emma's just asking for any kind of feedback on her version of the Star Wars style bar. So yeah, first off, Emma, like I think it's once again, like it's looking really cool. So and I think some of the things that you could just kind of keep pushing is potentially like let's just make sure I got the right image here. Is like you could start getting in some of these like pipes and cables and some of those elements to really help with the the composition and stuff. The other thing you could do is like there's a bit of like breakup in the floor and things, and I think that you could break the floor up a little bit more, so that it doesn't have this the tile texture kind of the same everywhere. So you could just work out some ways to kind of like just get some of those lines in there and kind of like break those things up.
Yep. Maybe pathways to doors or something like that.
yeah, that's right. Like all those types of things which you can see kind of. Sorry, once again I just realized that you guys can't see the cursor that's going on here. So
this thing here,
so like these kind of bits here, it's really like breaking up the surfaces and stuff.
Sure. Yep.
Which I think would be really good to add in around place. And in the concept, you can see it's just in one spot, but I think in yours, Emma, you could add it in a few more places, right? So let's try and find where again. Maybe I'm assuming that that's what this kind of is here, right? Is that type of thing. But yeah, you could certainly, like Tim said, kind of add it from once again I'm drawing on the sides, so my lines are all crooked, but you could add it sort of like some sort of breakup going up to the stairs, there. You could have a bit of breakup going to the door, and you could maybe have something else over here, and that would then stop these from being like all repetitive everywhere. That could be really good. And I think like a lot of the other details are really cool, and I think maybe some more like cables and things like that, just to add some of that kind of like compositional breakup and things. And what else could kind of be cool? Maybe I'm just gonna, sorry, it's hard because just kind of trying to, I'm assuming this is like the back of the chairs there as well, so maybe there could be a bit of like paneling in the textures and stuff like that might help kind of break up some of these shapes. So basically, I guess the thing that I keep saying is breakup. So it's looking for
there's a few things that still look a bit sort of low end gamey. Right. Which is sort of, again, like I think it's often one of the things, and that's why I spent ages talking about this today as well in class. Is just that often when you're doing stuff in game, you have to fight so hard to make it not look like nothing can just be a box with texture on it, because that just automatically looks like an old video game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So anything where it feels like it's a tiled texture, or like it's just a big thing that feels too uniform, it just kind of makes it feel as if it's sort of nothing. Now, you may find that there are actually situations like that in the world, because often manufacturing aims to have these kind of seamless, sort of like expanses of space and sort of texture. But in a video game, the number one thing you're trying to fight is the feeling of repetition, or that the world is kind of not unique, right? That there's not sort of like life to it, and sort of, because everything's sort of instanced. So the more you can kind of change the sizes of pots, have some different pots, like that sort of stuff, that sort of thing will sort of help a little bit. Because I feel like also some of those pots are a bit in her version are a little bit smaller than what we've got sort of here.
Like these ones,
and they don't have the exaggeration of shape. I think it's always good when you're trying to sort of play around with these things, is to try and always push the shapes as much as possible. It may look different when you're actually in sort of down close.
Yeah, but, in that kind of angle.
But I feel like that's one of the things, is you're always trying to, and that's why like so often when you've got like those outdoor areas where like this is the problem here, but it's even more of a problem when you're trying to design an outdoor environment that's organic, right? Where absolutely nothing ever can be repeated. It's all about kind of sticking down tiled textures and then blending them together with other sort of, you know, transparent sort of overlay textures and stuff, and sort of patching things together. So there's like always things you can do like that to kind of add that extra level of complexity. But I have no idea. I did not even know that there was a UE4 sort of thing class.
Oh, there is. There's like a couple. Yeah.
So I'm like, this is kind of cool.
Like, what is this? This is cool.
I have no idea what this is.
That's great.
So I'm just giving basic sort of design things, but I think it's always a matter like and again, I can't really speak to what a modeler or someone, you know, a level designer, what would it be? There's like like an environment.
Yeah, environment artist.
Environment artist. Yeah,
Yep.
environment artist. Yep. Yeah, is like, I think the more you can kind of push the shapes, and I think in 3D often kind of compresses shapes, right? Where you get sort of less contrast between one things. The silhouettes kind of don't pop as much as they can. The more that you can kind of create silhouette sort of pattern breakup, the better, because your enemy is uniformity and tiled textures.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've got here in the concept, if you've actually got this kind of light line around here, and that could be really cool to do exactly what Tim's talking about, where if you had something like that kind of around here, right, that's all of a sudden going to kind of like make this shape pop out a bit, because it's going to give a bit of contrast, right, in between the two. And that's the thing, is like, you know how Tim was sort of saying before, where lost my train of thought, you know, where things are really kind of simple. A lot of times, don't forget, they always have like that kind of 1, 2, 3. So something might be like a big panel that's kind of like simple, but then it also might have some secondary, you know, like kind of secondary and tertiary kind of details in there, right? So that's what you kind of just want to work into this a little bit more, Emma.
It looks sort of, you know, really simple.
Yeah, it looks really simple, right? So these chairs and things, like some of the things you do, it has like little patterns in, you know, like inset some details and stuff, like I drew on there before, you know, just some paneling things along here that you could then repeat, right? But once it's got those details, it's going to just, you know, come to life a little bit more. Work on like where you got the stairs, you know, you might want to have some like shapes that kind of, you know, do this or something, or something that goes around this way.
Or the stairs are different material, or something like
just
that.
To break up
and that may be that may be kind of in the model, or sort of in
it
the
looks
model,
like maybe there's some stuff.
I mean,
here,
in
so
the concept, sorry. But you know, I think it's a really hard job, I guess, because you've got to. But I think one of the key things is noticing, like, if you do have those kind of empty shapes, like, is there something that's actually breaking it up in the concept art? Yeah. Or is there, or if there's nothing, like, can you find something in the concept art that you could maybe sort of extrapolate upon?
Yeah, and kind of like add in there and stuff, because you always want to kind of make it look better, right? You want to keep, as plenty of people have, you know, we've had, you know, instructors sort of come out here and say, like, you know, plussing. You really want to be like, you know, plussing the design. So yeah, I know Emma's just saying she's posted up another image from like a different angle. So Emma, just trying to find it quickly. We'll see if we can. Too many.
So is this
too many places?
So the job of the task is essentially to model these things, I'm assuming in Maya or something like that.
Yeah, so they're all kind of model individual pieces and then putting together the layout of the room
in Unreal Engine.
Yep.
Cool. And then doing the lighting and that sort of stuff. Yeah. Can you add fog and that sort of thing in?
You sure can. You can pretty much do whatever you want.
Because I think often that's one of those things, is like, you know, that did have a bit of atmosphere.
Yeah.
That kind of image. And I think the more you could, that it may be that really kind of brings it together, you know, like maybe more atmosphere. Slightly more
cables.
Yeah, like it often is just that last few percent of sort of, you know, details will kind of, you know, give it a feeling of complexity. But the other thing is, we're looking at it from above, and that's not the position where it's designed to be seen at. So I'm assuming that there'd be different sort of focal areas and things like that would sort of come into play.
Yeah, just moving the. Oh, so here's one.
Yeah, so the new image is a bit more from sort of eye level.
Let's have a look.
Yep. Cool.
Sorry, just making it big so we can see. And yeah, I think, some of those details are probably working a little bit better in this one, right? So yeah, so it's a lot of it will be about the angle and stuff, Emma, as well. I think, Tim's probably right, those vases and stuff maybe are a little bit small. They kind of feel like if there was a person standing there, they're like really kind of small. Whereas I guess they're meant to be almost like a wine, jug that then you would tip that into other cups and things, I guess. Like that's sort of from the concept, that's what it kind of feels like.
They just seemed a bit bigger in the concept, but again, that could just be sort of field of view and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but I think that's it, Emma. It's just like breaking up some of these surfaces a little bit more, and
like
stuff.
What you can see is like the tiled nature of the texture is really coming through, and so I think that's often why you need to break up. Like as a concept artist, also you need to realize that if you don't break up your environments nicely, it's going to look really nasty because you've got that sort of tiled texture thing happening. So anything you can sort of do to kind of, play around with that, like sort of break up those different,
So this, for all you guys out here, what's happening here, right? This is the exact same principle as the dragon arm. Right? Like it's the same thing. It's
how
like
do they connect
this
to each other?
Cylinder connects into this floor. Yep. And how do we transition it to make it more interesting? So like if I was like, sometimes what will happen when you're a concept artist, right, is that you'll get, say, a screenshot like this, and it'll be like you have to paint over it to make it even cooler, right? To like plus the design. So the things that I'd look for here is like this kind of just really juts into here and it's quite jarring. So the first thing I'd sort of think of would be like, what can I do to kind of like transition that into the floor? And I'd think about maybe this is like sort of a darker material here, and it could be either angled or it could be flat and built up with a couple of different, like a couple of different ellipses and things to like have different, different forms to it and things. So yeah, so they're things that you can kind of do a little bit, Emma. Now I'm not sure how it goes in here. I don't know, sometimes, I think, see, there's actually like kind of a little section here where it kind of juts out like that, and that would just kind of break up that just ever so slightly, which would help a bit. And maybe you could even push that kind of further if you kind of wanted to.
But it does seem that also the lighting and the fog is probably going to hide the tiling nature of the textures as well.
Yeah.
So it can be very hard to figure out what that's going to look like until it's kind of all completely done.
And especially as well, Emma, like you probably this is probably, I'm not sure if this is, no, it's not the first time you've been doing UE4 stuff, so you got a bit of experience with that, don't you? So yeah, just keep going with those things. It's looking really good. Just keep pushing it, keep trying to work on those transitions, and look forward to seeing you getting it done. Awesome.
Yeah, no, it's really cool.
All right, we've got an image here from Mark. Let's just hide some of this stuff. Actually, I just saw then that Mark had posted some other stuff.
Check that out.
That was looking pretty cool.
Oh, sorry, I'm stealing your cursor.
That's all right. I think this is a totally different image, but oops. Just try pasting. There we go.
Cool.
So that is another 3D character that Mark's been working on. Let me just do a cursor for a sec as well. Let's put this back here. All right, there you go. Yeah, so hey Mark, cool stuff. Which one do you want to talk about, Tim? The model or the drawing?
I don't know. The model looks pretty good.
Yeah, the model looks awesome. Looks really cool. Maybe just some like proportional issues. Like looks a little bit kind of squat. Like a little bit kind of short. So maybe that. But I also see from the right hand render that it's kind of a little bit top down, so I'm just not sure if it's like a camera thing.
Yeah, it would be good to see more of like an ortho to actually get a feel for like from a design perspective. But I feel like a lot of the details look sort of nicely done.
Look great. Yeah.
Yeah, looks really cool. But yeah, without sort of seeing exactly what's happening. It looks pretty good. Like there's lots of details resolved, lots of cool kind of breakup of materials.
Yeah, lots of awesome little overlaps and stuff. It's great. Looks really cool, Mark.
Yeah,
awesome
cool
stuff.
But yeah, without seeing a bit more, sort of like close up of the face or something like that. Yeah, the costume design looks pretty sort of promising.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have a huge amount to say about that because I'm not a 3D modeler, but from a design perspective, yeah, I think it's looking pretty cool. But yeah, it would be good to see something that with less perspective distortion, so that we can gauge the proportions a little bit better.
All right. So what about the drawing? Do you want to give Mark some notes on here?
What was the question?
So after looking at Twitch a few times, I thought I'd see if I can get some feedback on my last character painting. I know I have a lot of areas to improve on, but I'd love to get some thoughts from you on where I need to put some more focus. The concept was an elf assassin that led a group of bandits known as the Red Cows. This is the moment she engages our hero in an alley after her plot within the town was thwarted. My self-critique is I feel this needs better texture on the leather and cloth and more contrast within the character itself. Yeah. So, yeah, I think first of all, like there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Yeah, so it's looking pretty good. I think Mark, that maybe some of the background I don't think is necessarily helping, right?
Well, it depends whether it's a character design or not. I mean, it's sort of like
or an illustration
as an illustration. Yeah. I mean, I think the character design is kind of good. Just sort of perspective wise and that sort of stuff. I'd say like with the background, one of the things is again like we've sort of got this sort of tiling sort of texture thing. There's probably a lot of sort of there's a lot of little details in the background because the background is sort of drawn very literally, right? It's not sort of drawn with a painterly sort of suggestive mindset. It's sort of like all these things are actually sort of drawn, which is really cool. But one of the things is they are going to draw your attention because there's a lot of contrast there. So it's worthwhile thinking about that. He's kind of blurted out a bit, but even with that,
so it's kind of like drawing attention away from the character, right? So I guess what Tim's sort of saying is sometimes the way he'll think about things, not to say what you're thinking,
go for it.
But like you'll kind of actually abstract the background a bit, to actually help show off the character, I guess. Yeah, and kind of sort of think about it even from that thumbnailing process early on. Rather than sort of sometimes with this type of thing, Mark, it always looks like you kind of worked on them separately and then just kind of like put them together and hope that it's going to sort of work out.
Yeah. So I think it's always that issue of sort of like 1, 2, 3 read, right? And it's like I feel like that's mostly what I sort of talk about in general in life. It's just like, you need to
I talk about it with like environments in terms of design, and then value, and you talk about the characters in much the same sort of way.
Mostly in illustration is where I kind of really sort of go into it. But I just sort of say is like, he actually has like this really sort of some cool
shapes back there,
shapes back there, and I feel like they're sort of value wise they're a little bit separated out. We can't quite see them as well as we could. It feels like lighting is sort of backlit. This is where you start to conceptually get into trouble because you have a character which is backlit, which is, I think that's pretty cool, right? Like I think that's a good idea, but it means you kind of basically what you're looking at from a drawing perspective is something that's going to be painting perspective is something much more where you've sort of got a silhouette. Right, and that's just less interesting because you kind of then can't see the character. So it's sort of it's a basic sort of light on dark, dark on light issue. So you either have a light character on a dark background or a dark character on a dark background, whereas kind of we have a medium character on a medium background.
Both.
So conceptually, what I'd say is think as much as you can about how the character is lit, know where your light source is coming from. Know where your light situation is, because I feel like that's one of the major things that's sort of causing trouble. The other problem, if the character's backlit, they've got a light behind them, you're not going to see that rim light, right? So what one of the problems you run into is like you could put some rim light on there, but you're not going to see it because it's just basically going to cut in.
It's the background color.
It's the background color. So typically the reason you would use a backlit sort of rim light scenario is if you kind of have a character that's dark on a dark background.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a nice silhouette of a character on a light sort of background, you kind of don't need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, yeah, don't worry about there being like sort of this shadow here. This is only going to confuse things. Think about where the light's coming from, like how are they actually getting light, and there's like lots and lots of different sort of ways to do this. Now what I'd say is with this image is it's actually been created with a fairly sort of, I don't know where the light source is coming from, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of form rendered, and that's
Mm-hmm.
cool. That's sort of working. I wouldn't worry too much about doing this, but I think with any kind of choice, you have to kind of say, am I going to render it with lighting in mind?
Yep.
Or am I not?
Yep.
And if you do, you kind of have to go all the way. And if you don't, then you don't.
And I think if it's not, it maybe might work better on a flat background, right?
Yep.
Because then you can kind of get away with get away with a little bit more stuff. Whereas when you got it in a scene, it's kind of like starts not making sense really fast.
Yeah. So these are just things you got to sort of think about. So things that I would sort of think about are making sure that the background is sort of secondary to the character, because it does seem like it is a very character sort of based thing, right? So think more about how, maybe you could, get some sort of lighter color here, or maybe some sort of fog or smoke or something like that that's going to, sort of fade out some of this stuff in the background. And that's going to help your 1, 2, 3 read to kind of really focus on the character. Now I know this is one of those things where I start kind of like deleting stuff from people's paintings, and they're like, no, but I spent ages doing that. I know you spent ages doing that. It's really cool. You can still actually
Mark
see
is saying, yeah, I definitely felt the background was giving me problems, and I almost scrapped the whole background. So
yeah.
I think you're on safe ground.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think the thing is like often what happens is when the counterpoint to this is often when people don't draw the background, they don't do it as defined as he is. They kind of just put some messy concept arty nonsense behind it. Then they don't draw all that stuff, and then the whole thing always looks a bit sort of messy.
Mm-hmm.
What you need is a combination of both, right?
Yep.
Is to say, I've got the stuff there, I've rendered it, it's important it's there, but it doesn't need to be distinct.
Sure.
And that's the key. So really we need to think about, again, if we do is this going to preview? No, it's previewing. So if we go like view, proof setup, you do the black and white thing?
I just do a layer thing over top, but
you just do
just go. You can do it.
No. It's half the time that's set up. So just make a black and white sort of layer, right? And then you can sort of see like what it's looking like. And I think now there's some pretty good contrast there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of okay. What you want to look at is the hole in the wall, right?
Remember,
the door,
people can't see a cursor.
Can't see the cursor. The hole in the door. The hole in the door, the arch, the whatever it is, right? The light, this big light shape behind. That's one value.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary thing you have to think about is this value here, which
Mm-hmm.
is just the background in aggregate. And then you've got the character. And I think it's actually breaking down pretty well, but you just want to exemplify that. You want to push that even further and say, the character, if you can really work the silhouette of this character by and large, because they're on, a really nice white sort of, field. And the secondary thing here is, we can sort of make sure, we just sort of make this even less distinct. Right, and that'll kind of work okay. So it's just a matter of like going through and having a plan. Once you kind of have some sort of logical thing that you're going to do, then you can easily sort of go through and have confidence to sort of say, yep, I can sort of push this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're going to run into issues like we were talking about the leather and the sort of rendering, and I'm like, yeah, I think you could definitely sort of work on that, but that's far less important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually very tricky to do if you don't have your visual hierarchy set up. The second thing to do would be to really focus on like, where are we looking, right? Like, where do you want the focus on the character to be?
Sure.
Right. So really just think about, okay, we want it on the face. So, to a certain degree.
Because at the moment, I kind of keep getting drawn to that sword, right?
Yes. Yeah. And we could focus on the sword, but to a certain degree, I'm going to sort of say, you know what, let's kind of almost make some of these sort of lower, parts of the character just fade a little bit more into silhouette, right? So that and we can sort of punch that silhouette, like if you've got this stuff on layers, that makes this whole thing a lot easier. And you can actually create something that's not just a giant mess. But the more you can kind of focus on that black and white aspect, even if you've got a character design, right? Part of what you're doing when you're designing a character is it should work like this. You should be able to see the character and say, hey, that's pretty cool. Yeah, like, you know, awesome. But yeah, really, you can work the silhouette. You don't need this sort of rendering here on the side because you've got a cool silhouette. So work it, you know, like use that and render as if maybe we've sort of got more of like a bit of like an ambient top light or an ambient light sort of, you know, in front of us a little bit, something like that. So you can basically just form render this and that'll be fine. I think it's actually working okay. What you want to do is just play around with things like separating the hand from the character a bit more. And yeah, this sword is way too sort of bright, right? Like think about how can you be a bit more sort of artistic with the sword, right? We don't, and I'd have to play around with exactly how you do this, but often these reflective swords are quite bright, but we can just sort of say, well, you know, maybe it's just sort of bright, you know, in one part or something like that. Because they're going to sort of like reflect the environment to a certain degree, and we probably want to sort of focus things more on the face. So that's kind of what I'd sort of say is think more about the global sort of, you know, overall image and what's important. If it's a character design, you know, other stuff is important, but also, you know, never underestimate the extent to which you can play around with things after by where do we have, by getting like a good, you know, sort of like grade on things. Do you know what I mean? Like once we've sort of done this, we can sort of really push, you know, like where you want that focal area to be, just from a like a contrast perspective, not like a good art perspective, but if you want to kind of like, you know, really push stuff, again, you can do the classic trick that I normally do where, you know, we can just sort of modify the colors, like homogenize the colors a little bit. You know, we could maybe do some stuff where we, you know, maybe cool down the background a bit, you know, and this is hard because often I know that when we go on the stream, it's like adjusting the contrast a bit. It's very hard to do this kind of illustration paint over stuff.
Well, it's kind of just the subtle little things that you're kind of messing around with.
But you can see that, you know, it's already quite warm, but we could certainly try and sort of maybe say, you know, let's maybe try and cool off the background, right? Make some of the background, and certainly those more sort of, you can see that sort of mask is doing that. So, right, if we get these guys in a group, right, you can sort of say, like, I'm just sort of trying to say, look here as opposed to here. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And you just can keep sort of doing that, keep tweaking the contrast, you know what I mean? Maybe make the cape redder or just exactly, you know, sort of to just full contrast. But your primary thing is you want 1, 2, 3 read, and you want to focus the eye where you want it.
But it looks really cool, Mark, and the 3D stuff looks great as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to certainly see more of that and see where you take those characters and things, because they're looking really cool. So yeah, all right, guys. Well, I think what we're going to do is let's have a little break. So let's kind of wrap up the feedback there. I know there was other stuff that was kind of submitted. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. It was looking really cool. We'll try and get feedback to you guys. I know I threw some in here from last week and stuff, so if we don't get to it, we'll try and get to it as we can. And yeah, let's have a 5-minute break, and we'll come back, and Tim's going to color up his character from last week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
All right.
See you in a bit.
Thanks, guys. All right, guys, we're back, and we're just going to get into the demo. Tim's he was doing this sketch last week in the stream, and this week just going to add a bit of color to it, and try and get it a little bit more resolved, I guess, or draw more on it, or whatever Tim's going to do to make it look cooler. So go for it, Tim.
Although it's not showing up on the stream, do we have to?
Oh, I think it will. No, I think it's just
Sure. Oh, there we go. I have to have it tabbed.
Well, that's weird. Okay. Oh yeah, it was doing that before. Okay,
yeah.
Anyway,
we know why that's happening.
Guys with us.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Cool. All right. So you can talk while we sort of go. So this computer is running really slow, but that's lucky because doing this sort of technique does not require a lot of computing power or anything, in fact.
Yeah, so I think while Tim's sort of setting this up and getting things going, I think a lot of, the feedback session today was really cool. There was lots of things where we're kind of, saying a really similar piece of advice for people. So, it's just generally sort of it's not that like you're always doing, like we're always going to say, oh, pay attention to the form, or, make more contrast, or whatever those things are. But just, I guess they're just things when you're starting your image, just try and pay attention to those things, right? So that you're kind of not forgetting about them all the time. So, and just try to, each time you do something, just try to not forget about that stuff as much, as much as the last time. And then slowly but surely those things will keep getting better and better and more solid as you go along. So but there's some really cool work that you guys are posting up and things. So so that's great. So looking forward to seeing where Tim goes with this here. Tim's looking forward to it as well.
Just trying to think what the best approach is going to be. So I think one of the reasons, again, I'm kind of like sort of keen to, play around with this technique and actually show some sort of, different things we can do, is just to show, like, again, the advantages of using different techniques. So, one of the advantages of sort of, like rendering in a line like this is I feel like it's really obvious and easy to kind of play with different color options. So what I'm going to do is do a couple of things. One is kind of just start to kind of say, well, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this whole value arrangement thing. I don't really have a solid plan for, what I want to do. But what I know is that I can use sort of different layers. Oh, if I actually get on different layers, I can use different layers to kind of help me make design choices, basically. So if I basically say, well, I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like in most cases, I just feel like this sort of stuff that he's kind of got with him is going to be sort of a little bit darker. Not the skulls. The skulls will be lighter, but all of this kind of like sort of ragged goop and that sort of stuff that he had on him, I'm going to make that darker. So again, also interesting to note is, again, we're sort of painting on different weird monitors, and it is really tricky to sort of gauge, how light and dark things are. I'm sure people kind of run into that when they sort of, upload stuff to the stream. Because again, the stream's going to add contrast. Often we have that people hand stuff up and they're like, it looks different on the projector, and this looks different and that looks different. And it's like, well, that's actually a big part of being a digital artist, because you don't get to choose where people are going to view it. So one of the things I'm trying to do is, I can't see, because this is the screen that I'm drawing on is not super high quality. And also we've got lights sort of blaring at us, so it reduces the contrast. Anyway, what I can do is actually just check the actual values that I'm using, and sort of make sure that I'm just not doing anything stupid. So these are sort of, this dark color is at about 20, And I reckon that's pretty good because the lines are at sort of, obviously black, sort of 0. This isn't sort of super dark, but this is a good place to kind of be. It's obviously the value is different enough from the skin tone, which I'm going to play around with. So what I'm doing is just...
Well, the other thing is just how you're doing this at the moment, and I know, sorry, it's kind of like really lagging. We're trying this on a different setup today, but it's a bit of a fail, so we'll have to work on something else. But also, you're painting in a mask here, or you've
no, I'm just doing. I've clipped empty layers to just this old selection we made. So if you remember, what I did is I just drew the line, and then I basically made this sort of flat selection based on the lines.
Yep.
And what I've done is I've clipped a bunch of layers to that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put like different elements on different layers, which is the simplest, dumbest way you can possibly do it. But it's also super quick, and I can do it with any brush I want, and I don't have to think about it at all. Do you know what I mean? I don't have to do nothing.
And we've got a bit of a question in the chat that says, sorry for a dull question, but is it a Wacom Intuos Pro medium or large? So it's not
this isn't
that we're working on at the moment. Well, I think, is the question that you want to know what to buy, or
this
is
an Intuos Pro medium?
Yes, we tend to use the medium ones, but I don't know. Like, I've had large ones in the past and then used smaller ones, and I kind of felt like there was no difference. So then I was like, well, I might as well just get a smaller one, because then it's like more portable.
You can fit it in a backpack.
Yeah,
but this is not the new one.
Yep.
The new one, the medium, is almost as big as a previous small. So you notice with the new Wacoms, what is the new one called? The Intuos?
I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
But
the one we're using here is like Intuos Pro, but then there's a newer one than this.
Yeah, that's also Intuos. It's Intuos Pro something.
I think it's probably just Pro as well.
Yeah.
It's just the new.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pen 2.
Yeah, with the Pen 2.
Yeah.
So the stuff that's got the Pen 2 tablet, the one I have is the medium, but it's actually not much bigger than my old sort of small. And I have the small because the small is the previous, like, Intuos 4 sort of small.
Yeah.
Was exactly the same size as a 13-inch MacBook Pro. So if you have a thing that you can jam a MacBook Pro
a bag that you can just slot it into,
slip them both into, like, off you go, which is actually super useful. But yeah, I've the bags that I had that I could sort of fit. I think I have like a bag that nicely fits a 13-inch, and it also fits like a 15-inch MacBook Pro, and I can fit the medium in there. Whereas this thing, you wouldn't be able to fit it in that. So it's actually, I would recommend the medium. The new one, just the medium version, is like pretty good.
So I literally have like a Intuos Pro small. So that it fits in my laptop bag. Because the medium one doesn't sort of quite fit in. So it is something to think about. Like, if you're like, I feel like if you're more of like a professional working environment where you don't move around too much, then it doesn't matter. You can get whatever you want, right? But if you're a student that is doing stuff in classes, taking your tablet, like, it's definitely something to think about before it's too late, right? Because once you buy it, it's like, oh shit, it's not going to fit in my bag.
Totally.
So I think that's a thing to definitely kind of think about. So someone's just saying I bought one, and I bought the large and then realized it's huge and people preferred the small or medium, went with the new medium. And just saying, so the new medium one's pretty cool. I think that's your response to it, right? Like, it's pretty awesome.
There's no reason not to buy it. And you can't even, there's not a smaller one you can get.
Yeah, that's just their sort of small size now. You can still buy the previous generation small size, but you can't buy a new one that's small, because it's basically the medium's the same size. It's the same size, yeah. So they're obviously just getting more resolution into the kind of like drawing
there's
area.
The active area, and they basically just managed to shrink, because even though this is quite large, right? Like this sort of one is quite large. The active area is, like the active area is kind of, this big, and the tablet is kind of that big. So they've just shrunk.
Yep. All the side bits.
Yep. Yeah. And the critical number is like that. It's the same size as like a 13-inch laptop. So you can kind of just fit it in your bag.
Any other questions like that, guys? Go for it. We are here to answer questions.
We are here to answer questions,
especially while Tim's sort of just kind of blocking this in. But it's already like starting to have a bit of life to it, which is cool. Just separating those values out. Yeah. I've got kind of the stream up on the other screen, guys, so I can sort of almost see like a little thumbnail of what Tim's doing. So yeah, and like that's sort of looking pretty cool.
Yeah, but it's lagging.
Aside from the fact it's lagging.
Well,
I've like never seen it do this, but anyway,
it's probably because we're using it to stream and to.
Yeah, I think it's just.
But yeah,
I was smashing the computer pretty hard today as well, and probably didn't do a restart, and just all these things culminating. Into one annoying.
Well, it's lucky that I'm really good at using this process, and it sort of doesn't matter.
It's lucky that I'm not painting on here because I'd be getting really annoyed.
Yeah, you would. Yeah. But I'm just
like stream's over, guys. We gotta.
I mean, I look. I think it's. I mean, one of the things is, I've sort of. I try and sort of with a lot of these sort of techniques that are more sort of production techniques, right? I think it's kind of like important to just make sure that your process is robust. If it does require, like hardcore computing or something like that, you might be in trouble if you don't sort of have that. And also, this is kind of like this is a really simple sort of process. I could basically do the whole thing with the lasso tool if I wanted. So again, what I'm trying to do is I've got, some different sort of objects.
The other thing you could do is maybe just crop your image for like right now if you want.
It may be also because this is like, it's a large image.
It's fairly big.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll save this. We'll wait a whole bunch of time while it saves and figures out how to save, which may actually be harder than.
You should be able to crop it. No, it shouldn't. Saving to the hard drive.
We're just saving to the hard drive or the network drive or something. So essentially what I'm going to do, like just so you can sort of, there's no kind of secret. I'm just going to sort of flat out the basic shapes, and then I'm just going to play around with the colors until it sort of looks good, and then I'm going to spend very little time doing rendering, because really the key to this is once you do that basic stuff, you don't really need to do much you don't need to do much more.
Yeah,
like the lines are there, like that's the whole advantage of it. So what we'll do
and that phase of it is like a lot faster.
So what it does is allows me, I can do this a lot easier because most of the hard work is done. What sort of remains is, more of the design. And all that.
Just see if that helps a bit.
I think it will. What I'll also do is I'll delete these old. And we'll see whether this makes a difference. Because the number of things you have to do.
So someone's asking like, what's the purpose of this piece? Is it like concept art or is it illustration?
100% concept art. I would, for illustration, I'd try and do something.
So you might even do this before you did illustration, right? So that you sort of have a character in mind to then put in an illustrated kind of scene.
I mean, the idea is, this would take an hour and a half, something like that. It's taking a bit slower because I'm kind of, sort of
talking and going through and
going blah blah blah,
working on different computers and
purging history,
all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, cool. Let's see if this is faster. I bet you it won't be faster. All right. So the other thing is that I think something that's really underappreciated when people are sort of thinking of working in these sorts of styles is that part of the reason I'm able to kind of go like I'll be able to sort of color this pretty quickly is because the line drawing is so sort of sketchy. that, you know, if I don't quite, you know, meet all the lines and get everything sort of working, it's not really going to matter. And so many things are about imagining how finished you're going to take things and then kind of preparing for it. Like I was sort of mentioning that, you know, with your sort of images, like often people sort of just imagine, and especially with sort of digital art, it seems like a lot easier than it should be, I think, to kind of just keep working on something. But that's actually, you know, that's actually very like a relatively new scenario where you could be in a scenario where you can just keep, you know, adding detail. Normally you really have to plan and say, how big is this image going to be? You know, like what am I going to do? You know, exactly how's everything going to work? And if you don't figure it out, you'll never be able to finish it, you know, because you need to have a serious plan in mind. Whereas now it's so easy to just sort of say, let's add detail. But this process doesn't really allow you to do that. I kind of have to very much think like, how much detail am I going to add?
Yeah, and is that something that you think comes with practice as well?
Oh yeah, totally. I think like all processes require you to kind of know how long is it going to take me to do this. You know, what am I doing? How much? And that's what allows you often to skip steps and kind of go a bit faster, because you can sort of be like, well, you know what? This is actually an important step, but I know from experience that no one will care because you won't even see that because this will get covered up. You know, like talking about, you know, the backgrounds. Often with people do like those, it's actually a really cool loose background, and you know, you try and take that to a finish, it can actually take you 30 times the number, the amount, because it's not just that you have to spend time doing it, but you have to you know, you have to make your bad background good, you know, and you'll have some really cool shape that, oh wow, that looks really amazing, and just doesn't look good now. What's the wrong?
It's once you stick a perspective grid on it, doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense, and now the cool shape that was like key to your composition sort of, you know, doesn't work at all. You know, so you got to figure out some other way to do it. You know, that stuff happens all the time. So it's really important to kind of have a plan, I would say. So I'm kind of just, again, these are sort of flat, just sort of really simple flat colors. I'm not entirely sure about the gold thing, and it is really this is colored super rough. If you zoom up, like if I sort of zoom up to how badly this is colored, right? It's like zero points for staying in the lines, right? Like this is not quality stuff at all. But it really doesn't matter, because again, I'm just trying to get like the overall vibe, and I'll show you kind of how, you know, how important that is. So something here I've also sort of got to sort of render up is we've got this kind of sack, right? The sack with mushrooms. So we've got a brown sack, and I'm going to make the ropes. Let's make them a bit like this color, so the ropes are slightly lighter than the sack. Then I'm going to have some dirt, which is maybe a bit more saturated, slightly darker than the sack itself, maybe a bit darker still, maybe a bit darker still, although that's getting quite dark. I have a feeling that's going to look quite dark on screen. Again, depending on what screen you have, these things are all going to look sort of different. So here we've sort of got
it's amazing, like it's amazing this, you know, this kind of theory. Like I'm actually looking at Tim's screen that he's looking at, and I'm kind of on the side, and like Tim said before, this was just a screen we grabbed from the other side of the office, and it was just a random screen, and it's probably not that great. So from the side it actually looks just like I'm at a 45-degree angle, and the image looks really different to the thumbnail that I can see that you guys are seeing on Twitch, right? If I kind of lean over it, it makes a bit more sense.
Yeah,
but it's really an important thing to think about.
And I can see the thumbnail on Twitch, so I'm sort of a bit more aware of what you guys can see. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. But one of the things that really like drills this home is just working in print, because in print all of these issues are so much more exacerbated by, you know, the degree to which print just ruins your life by changing colors and changing values and making stuff way more gray. So you really have to sort of check the values and say, is this going to print, right? You can't sort of trust your eyes. You have to say, like, you know, is there anything here that's actually white, you know? because that's just going to be paper color.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's going to look very sort of different.
Yeah. And the other thing to think about is one of the things that, you know, can tend to happen is like you'll be like, oh, it's a different color on this screen, or it's a different blah blah blah. Well, just the one thing to think about is to just make sure that your value relationships in your image are working, because if they're working, it doesn't matter what screen you view it on. Even if the colors go fluoro, the image should sort of hold together, because so I tend to, whenever somebody says like, oh, it's this and that or whatever, I'm be like, well, it's still, the bits that you've done don't work, right?
Yeah.
So it's just that's one thing to think about, is like, just make sure that whatever you're doing, like it's all working in relation to each other on the image, and then you run into kind of less troubles. And just thinking about like contrast and stuff, you know, making sure that the background color in your and the elements are not too close together, so that those things pop out if they're printed. And there's lots of little sort of sneaky techniques, I guess, you can do to make things kind of work and be a bit more foolproof, I guess.
Or just study old illustrators.
Mm-hmm.
Study the Dean Cornwells, J.C. Leyendeckers, Rockwell, and just see how solid those images are. You cannot kill those images. Just take it into Photoshop, mess with the levels, just try and make that thing not look like what it is. It will never break, ever.
Yeah,
it's just absolutely bulletproof. That's what you should aim for. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's, you know, like a serious goal is to make sure. What is that?
I think you just dragged a dragged a layer accidentally.
So that's
well, because those guys were like masters of like their time in terms of like they had to do with the print a lot and all that kind of stuff, and so they really paid attention to their like values and the way the contrast works, so that when you do like bring those images into Photoshop and kind of like you know, turn them into black and white or kind of crunch the levels a bit and things like that, they still work really, really well, because they were actually thinking about those things, not like we're making it up. They were thinking about that stuff when they were kind of constructing the images.
Process was so poor. You kind of needed to, right? If you didn't do it, you know, you wouldn't be like, oh, my image is
it's like, I can't see any of the stuff that I've spent, you know, a month
it
painting.
Would just completely disappear. So that sort of thing is worth thinking about. So that's why, again, like to a certain degree, some of it has to be mathematically based, right? Like, I know the background is 29. That's fairly dark, right? Like, so if I want like a good silhouette, the whole character needs to be a little bit darker still. So you know, that's sort of important to pay attention to. Although, you know, again, I might actually, you know, if I was being a bit sort of clever, I'd probably say, I reckon this background should be a little bit kind of lighter, right? Like that might actually work a little bit better. That might help it read a bit better. Chug, chug, chug. Just lower that stuff down a bit. Cool. Anyway, like the basic idea is if I do all this sort of stuff, I can maybe, pretty sure I turned that off.
I don't think anyone can see that anyway.
No.
Just so Tim keeps pressing a button and Siri keeps popping up asking him, what can I help you with today, Tim? And Tim's like, go away, I'm trying to do a
I'm working.
So I guess we've got like kind of 10 more minutes to go in the stream. So if you have any questions, guys, last questions, please let us know.
And I might be spending another 5 minutes or something trying to finish this. Because again, like the problem is like I can go pretty fast, but I'm sort of having to go at the speed at which it'll kind of let me. But just important to kind of note, if I put this in with a sort of a brighter color, it allows me to kind of gauge where my edges are, right? So that's one of the reasons I'm doing this, is not just because I want it to be white, although I did think he could be like a creepy kind of white sort of rat guy. But that just does help me see, like, you know, do I have any weird sort of, you know, areas where you can see where we're sort of going outside the lines and that sort of stuff.
And do you, like, very often, you know, once you've got these block-ins of value and color, do you kind of, because you've got them all on different layers and stuff, do you then kind of mess around with them a bit and kind of adjust the colors and values and things?
Well, that's the whole point of doing the whole thing, really.
Yeah,
like,
awesome.
That's the biggest advantage of working this way, is you kind of don't have to really worry about, you know, can I change that? You know, it's super easy to kind of just change some of those sort of, and it's actually interesting, you know, because like, you know, Scott Robertson, who, you know, wrote the How to Draw and How to Render books, you know, and has had, like, you know, lots of sort of influence on people, and, you know, they're sort of, you know, learning how to render and stuff. Like, the process that he uses for rendering the cars, right, where, you know, you use everything's on a separate layer, that's very similar to what I do when I'm just drawing, like, little comic book things, because I think even though I'm not a like a, you know, a technical, like, artist that much, it's certainly the case that I really dislike redoing things, and I like to have, like, a very sort of streamlined process. Yeah, so
I think over time it probably speeds things up a lot, right? But it just takes a while to work out that process and everything.
Yeah. Well, I think also, like, to a certain degree, like, I think that systemizing things so that you've got everything on a separate layer helps you to think things through and learn a little bit better. Because I can sort of, you know, if I use this sort of process, for instance, one of the things that will kind of happen is that I'll really learn, is it the color or the rendering, right, that kind of makes this character, you know, like, not work, or, you know, like, what's actually happening, you know, like, why is this interesting or kind of not interesting. Whereas, you know, if I'm just sort of painting, you know, I kind of have to do all those things at once. So that's sort of, you know, it's to a certain degree one of the things that kind of taught me how to, you know, how to, you know, make art, really.
Yep.
So yeah, one of the things I can do is I can press Control J. That's going to duplicate that layer. Let's hide that one. Let's go Control U. And now I can sort of, you know, change the color of the character. Right? I can make him, if I increase the saturation, we can, like, you know, actually make him,
awesome,
sort of different colors. And this is where I think you can sort of sit back and do a bit more sort of design, right? So I can sort of, you know, I can zoom the image out a little bit more and sort of say, you know, what do I want? Do you know what I mean? Do I want a dark sort of creature? Do I want it to be a color, right? Maybe I could have it to be sort of like a blue, you know, maybe he could be like, really, you know, like he was, do you know what I mean? Like,
so kind of all that legwork is kind of leading up to this point.
Yeah, to just sort of see, like, does it look good if he's kind of pale? If so, how pale? You know, would it be better to kind of have him be pale and sort of, you know, maybe, and obviously, like, you know, the pinks and purples and stuff aren't going to work, you know, because he needs to be sort of a natural color. But, you know, how far can I go, basically?
Yep. Awesome.
So there's lots of sort of tweaking, and I'm just thinking, and I'm looking at the thumbnails, and I'm sort of going, like, what's what, you know, like, how does this sort of work? Like, what is, you know, and it's very easy to sort of, zoom out and sort of, you know, check that silhouette, see what's working, see what's not working. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure which one I like. So, and again, if I have sort of separate sort of layers, I can keep doing this and sort of say,
you can kind of just tinker with it until you're kind of happy with
things.
And
I think that the difference is, you know, you can sort of sit back, you know, I can sort of take a break, look at some other stuff, you know, come back and sort of, you know, get a fresh perspective on it a lot easier if I do it that way than if I...
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And we've got a little question in the chat is which books would you recommend for studying improving visual storytelling? And yeah, we had some answers in the chat as well. Like Framed Ink is obviously a really cool one. Do you have any other books that you would sort of recommend for like visual storytelling stuff?
The number one book for visual storytelling is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud.
Yeah.
I think it tells you more about visual storytelling than basically kind of anything else.
Yeah.
I think Framed Ink is good. I really like it. But it depends whether I think like Framed Ink has like really cool art. Do you know what I mean? Like Understanding Comics is written as a comic. It doesn't have as much sort of cool art. But
the theories are awesome.
But the theories and the understanding and the depth is sort of pretty much unparalleled. But Framed Ink, like the art is so sort of cool. It really does inspire you to sort of to get stuck in there and do it. And everyone really likes that book. And I think a big reason for that is just that the art in it is so kind of good and inspiring, and it does really make it feel sort of, I think the looseness that he kind of uses makes it feel very sort of approachable. Yeah, he gives a really good example of. I think so much of it is just it's about like how cool and how much story you can tell through just having good composition, right? And telling good stories that you don't need to necessarily be rendering everything up.
Have the most highly rendered image.
Exactly. It is so much of visual storytelling is about that basic compositional, stuff.
Abstract shapes and all that type of thing, which is what we're talking about to you guys in the stream. Like a lot of times the things that we're doing are kind of like breaking your more detailed images down into simpler things, right? Like toning down characters and backgrounds and, all that kind of stuff so that it has more of a simplistic read to it, which I guess is what, a lot of those books are talking about, the shapes and things. There's another really cool book by Hans Backer called Dream Worlds, which is also has a lot of he's an old Disney artist and has a lot of really cool stuff in there. And the other thing that you can do to really help like sort of visual storytelling is like studying movies, and film stills. I know we've had a couple of like instructors and things that have done like westerns, because there was a lot of awesome visual storytelling with those types of movies. They had less kind of like frills in the actual kind of like
just simple
stuff, right? With cowboys and guns and black and white. Even black and white is I know like the Framed Ink stuff, like I know that the author really focuses a lot on like that kind of film noir kind of stuff, because once again it's like there's this whole, if you think about film noir and being black and white and stuff, there's a whole level of sophistication that's taken away from the director, which is color. And basically you have to use sort of like shapes and abstraction to create interest, So like if you look at those things, then you can sort of learn what the directors and the cinematographers were trying to do, right? Like how they're trying to make compelling images by using less tools. And then what you should take away from that is then, okay, well, if I can add color and, intensity and saturation, all that kind of stuff,
surely it should be better.
Yeah, then then if you get that really understanding of the basic stuff, then you can make things better, right?
Yeah.
So they're the things that just some little tips that you can kind of do. So but all on the right track, and it's great that you guys in the chat are answering some of those questions. And I can totally see how this is really starting to come along quite quickly, Tim. Which is cool.
It looks heaps more saturated on the stream.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think one of the things that I like, another thing that I think is really important to look at when we're doing this kind of art is often, you would kind of be doing these flat colors and it does look a little bit sort of cartoony or, sort of, a little bit sort of simple, which is, a lot of people don't mind that, but So I've got a couple of tricks that I'll kind of look at in a sec to kind of maybe homogenize this color scheme a little bit.
Cool.
And
he's starting to look pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's coming together. I mean, I can see that at this like simple stage, it's really cool. Like all the things are kind of tying together, and you're sort of building the image up as a whole. Even if like somebody sort of said like, "Oh, stop now, that's it, deadline's over." Like you can kind of hand this off, and it's like,
yeah, it's still there.
Here he is, right?
Most of it's there. Yeah. So things I'm not entirely sold on are the mushrooms as a color. So if we kind of were to select this kind of color, let's not sample all layers, just sample this layer. So you know, again, I can kind of go in and say, well, what are these mushrooms going to be like? So I feel like just, yeah, they could be a little bit less green, like a little bit less saturated.
That's cool. It's really cool with this sort of technique. It feels like you got a lot of control over the design of things.
Yeah.
You know, the design of the colors and stuff like that. So I think it's a really interesting note for you guys watching the stream, which is like, just if you're a bit more organized with those things, then it gives you a lot of control later on. Yeah, when you kind of want to be tinkering around with stuff, because that's sometimes like one of the things, like I always remember when starting out, was like you kind of just forget about some of those options. You're more just like, I'm trying to paint the leg to make it look like a leg, and you kind of forget about even making choices about the actual, should this be red or green or
exactly.
And you kind of go like, oh, it's too hard to change. I'm not changing it. And you kind of get stubborn. Yeah. It's one of the things I hate hearing the most. Is like, I'm not changing it. I'm just like, yeah, but just you need to. Right? To be so if you kind of have that feeling, guys, like really trying, like generally that's just to do with like, you kind of process and how you're doing things. And, you know, if things are a bit too hard to change, then you should definitely try and work out a way where it's sort of easier to do that, because it's super important, I think.
Yep. So I feel like making that skull a little bit sort of darker. It feels it's a bit too sort of gray. So I'm just trying to think about making the skulls the right sort of value, like whether they're going to be sort of. But I feel like it could be, he's kind of this bone white creepy thing. I feel like maybe it could be cool if like the skulls are like the same sort of thing. And again, if you do this properly, you can make sure there's no sort of nasty selections and things like that. But you know, there's going to be, because I'm just filling random things and stuff. Again, if we zoom up, you'll see that this is like super messy. You know, if I take the lines off, you know, it's just kind of like, whoa, you know, no points for anything. And that's why, like, you know, the line sort of technique is sort of effective, because it holds it all together, you know, and it means I can be super rough here. So again, you know, if I wanted to do a simple shadow pass, for instance, because I think this is kind of looking okay, you know, I can do that. But I think one of the things I'd want to do first is maybe just try and homogenize the colors a little bit more. So if I can just get that to actually pick a thing, let's make a new layer. And what I could do is just like fill the whole thing with like a sort of a warm color. And then what I'll do is kind of like reduce the opacity like heaps. So I've only sort of got maybe like 15-20%. And what this does is it kind of just grays everything out a little bit and gives me sort of, you know, like a lack of that sort of, you know, silly contrast, which is, depends what you want, right? If you want something that feels more realistic, that's often what you want. You want to kind of reduce the cartooniness of the image. You know, if you don't, then, you know, maybe something else will be doing. But often what happens is we lose some contrast there. So, you know, if I increase the contrast like this,
you just kind of punch it up again, but the colors are a bit more unified.
Yeah, that's the, again, what that is a really simple way to do that, right? There's other ways you can kind of color manage or whatever, but that's one of the best ways. If we kind of hide these, right? You can sort of see, there's some sort of differences, but that's just sort of bringing it all together a little bit, which is just, I just find that's often pretty useful. So yeah, I'm gonna sort of just paint in some, like, a quick sort of shadow pass, and like sort of not too long, and I'll just show you like one or two more tricks to kind of figure out how we can just trying to get a good sort of shadow color with hard light. And it doesn't really matter, like there's so many different ways with sort of hard light, or like any of these sort of different sort of shading methods that I can get.
So you're just making a new layer and setting that to hard light?
Yep.
Yep.
And now I'm going to play with putting some shadow in there. But I think this particular, yeah, I want this one. This, because that was like a very hard brush. Whereas what I want is a bit of a softer brush, so I can do some sort of rendering in there.
Just a bit of softening between.
Yeah, because it was basically just like a, and that's better for doing the flat colors, right? Because it means that, I'm not going to get too much blurriness between them. With this one, I want to try and get a bit of sort of softness and do a bit of rendering if I kind of can, so I don't have to make such hard choices. But what I'd say is, if you do this the first time, right, I'd say like one of the most important things you can do is actually just try and do the shadows with a hard brush, because it forces you to make very solid decisions, right? We just kind of have to say, you know what, this is all in shadow, or this is all not in shadow. Now, if I need to be sort of subtler, like a really good way to sort of do this is just reduce the opacity of the brush by hitting the number. Oldest trick in the Photoshop book, and still super useful, is you can just use the number keys to change the brush opacity. And by doing this, again, I can sort of...
And so it looks like you're kind of thinking about the overall form of the shapes, and then also indicating a few little bits of kind of texture with, with sort of, the lighting bouncing around in kind of areas, and and just, focusing on kind of the forms overall.
Yeah, so I'm doing, and this brush is a bit textural, so it's going to give me some texture. But really all I'm doing is just like the super rough. Again, I'll take the lines off here when we're sort of finished, because I'm literally like only going to take a few more minutes to do this. But again, it's just the advantage of kind of doing, because it's the advantage of using this sort of technique. You've got to imagine, I'm not just doing one of these a day. I'm not just doing 2 of these a day. I might want to do like 10 of these a day. Do you know what I mean? If I'm really sort of going crazy, and probably that's, a few too many, but you can see that, I can get something that reads. It is actually possible for me to get something to reads, if I'm just doing this super fast. And if you've got a lineup of them, and you just like, splosh, 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 this can go real quick. And, you can actually very effectively step back and evaluate designs versus each other when they're at this level of finish. We don't need to add more, we can and we should for later things. But if I'm going really quickly, this is often all we kind of need to do. And I could easily, do 5 of these in a day or 4 of these in a day, and it would just be a matter of like more detail, less detail.
No, it's cool. It's awesome how much it's kind of like coming together really quickly.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I'm not. Because obviously I know where I'm going with it. I don't know. You're probably looking at it going like, that is the because last week you're like, that's maybe you should put more detail into the line drawing. And I'm like, no, it'll be okay. And then it's like, we sort of do this, like if we look at the image, like sort of sans lines, and sort of zoom up again, it's like no one's winning any prizes for for sort of digital painting.
But I think what's cool though is that like it still kind of holds together, like value wise, like that. So that's kind of another good trick you can do, which is turn the lines off. And if things are looking really out of control, it's like you probably need to just rein things in a bit, right?
Yep.
But if you kind of look at it and go like, oh, if I squint my eyes, it kind of looks good. Then
and especially if it has the same pattern, because that's going to give you that video game style. You know, I'm looking at something from across the room. Yeah, and again, like, you know, also part of the reason for this is, you know, I did want a sort of like this sort of Skaven style, sketchy kind of, you know, like ugly, nasty, gnarly little sort of rat creature thing. So you know, it does work to kind of have that sketchiness there. You know, it's sort of working for me. You know, but you know, I could maybe do something with the lasso tool. You know, if I didn't have that, you know, there's other things I could do. Again, if I wanted to, you know, quickly do a bit more, right, I could maybe make another hard light layer with, you know, slightly lower opacity, and I could put some sort of highlights in. I'm not going to do that or like much of that, but you could easily sort of do that to kind of, you know, push a couple of these sort of areas back and sort of give us some, right, some contrast. Maybe add some sort of highlights to some of these mushrooms. You know, if that sort of stuff is needed. So, you know, or if something needs to be shiny, like I think probably one of the major, you know, if you've got 10 seconds, let's try and make this axe look a little bit shinier. So it feels like it could actually sort of cut something. And that's just a matter of kind of, you know, sharp blades kind of have that sort of more raw, sort of shiny look. So again, you know, that's like a basic, you know, sort of quick job. Another trick would be make another hard light layer, right? Let's get an airbrush. Let's just select black or something like that. Let's select a low opacity. Now I'm just going to kind of grade up the character to sort of simulate some sort of overall global lighting. So I'm sort of taking the concept of that, you know, like sort of smaller detail that I had, and yeah, just kind of making it, you know, have more subtlety. And so then what I can do is we can add some sort of levels, right? If I want to kind of give the guy a bit more contrast still, you know, I can sort of play around with that now. You know, again, I could kind of also say, where do I want my #1 read to be? You know, let's...
Might need to zoom up a little bit.
Yeah, zoom up a little bit so we can see.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the thing is you don't want to zoom up a little bit. You want to have it you want to have it zoomed out. But, you know, I could sort of make some of these areas like, you know, a little bit sort of darker. And, you know, then we could sort of, again, play with some sort of contrast stuff, because now I've got some lights and darks. You know, I can sort of play around with, let's make, you know, for instance, our sort of darker colors a little bit warmer, right? And I'll just kind of, again, select sort of that. And then I can say, let's make, oh, a bar. That's no good. Although I don't think anyone can see that anyway.
Nope.
In fact, I don't think people can even see the selected color sort of like adjustments.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. So we won't do that anymore. So again, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to increase like the cyan and the coolness of the character, right? And just kind of see whether, just sort of tweak colors, you know, see whether that's gonna make a difference. Yeah, and again, then we can play around with that same sort of like color adjustment stuff. And see what happens. So just sort of like once we've sort of got those things there, it's kind of possible to like use them and actually exemplify them, even though it's this nasty kind of mess of nothing, right? It can actually be super useful.
Yep.
Because you can sort of use the colors that are there and say, let's actually add more contrast. I didn't put it in initially, but as long as you've got like a good separation between sort of dark and light and stuff, then you can sort of go pretty crazy. Anyway, I think make him look a little bit sort of darker or something like that is sort of cool, but that's pretty much all I'm gonna do. So yeah.
Yeah, do you want to spend more time on this, Tim? Like, do we want to come back next week and you want to do more?
No, because I think
you're kind of done with this guy.
I think that's kind of like that's sort of as far as it goes, really. I mean, the other thing you can sort of do is add some rim light. Like that's another good way to kind of really add some sort of cheap production value, right? And you can just add like a white rim light. Right, just sort of initially and sort of think about, and again, this one probably takes you a while to kind of make it sort of really sort of work. But this is the situation where I kind of have a dark character on a dark background. If I can sort of work some rim light in there, right, it'll instantly have more production value for, not like relatively speaking, you know what I mean? Like not as much effort as you might think. So yeah, that's the kind of thing you could definitely sort of play around with, right? Like adding some sort of rim light to make some of these characters like sort of pop.
So you're just thinking about adding in that light from the coming in from
lights
the left
coming
there?
In from the right. Yeah, so it's like lights coming in from this direction, and it's really just a way for me to separate. It's very easy for me to kind of separate now, these sort of separate sort of objects, right? I could maybe even kind of try and pull it in here. I mean, and rim light is kind of pretty fake light, generally speaking, but that's something
it's hard to get that in real life.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the only thing I'd sort of really do as like a final. Like, does it need more? Probably not. The best thing to do would just be draw more of them, because that's what's fun, and that's the whole point of it. And if I was to do this, as like a final kind of render or something like that, I'd probably want to spend a couple of hours on the line drawing, a couple of hours on the color. So is your like line drawing kind of representative of the color, like the amount of time you want to spend coloring things? Like, is that sort of the way you kind of think about it a bit? Yeah, it's got to be about half normally. Because if I'm going to add all this color and have some time to design stuff and think about that sort of stuff, it's probably going to take me about twice the time. And if I spend 2 or 3 hours on a line drawing for a character, I'm going to spend time going in there rendering every bit of the mushroom. I'm going to look at mushroom reference, and I'm going to sort of say let's have different mushrooms, right? For instance, that would be something. But I think when you're doing this kind of concept design, the real trick is like it's meant to spark ideas, and that's exactly what it would be. Is like maybe he should have one giant mushroom on his back, maybe he should have like some really weird, like gnarly this, or maybe you should have some other thing, maybe some other kind of skull, or maybe he should be more like a zombie, or maybe he should have like a different axe, or maybe he should have I don't know, like arms with spike gauntlets on them or something, and that's what you do, and you just kind of go like, oh, that's a cool idea, oh, that's a cool idea,
and just keep iterating on them.
And that's the whole point. The point is not to get something that's like good as a piece of art. It's just to kind of give you an idea and say, well, if I can tell what that's like. As if you got all those ideas, you can't tell people. You've got to draw them, and then you've got them recorded, and then I can go back and say, yeah, that one did look better than that. So it's to get ideas on like out of your brain into a like a physical form. So that's the whole point of it.
That's awesome.
It's not to be like, let's add more detail, or let's render this. Render the least amount possible.
Oh, that's awesome, Tim. Well, yeah, cool. I think we'll wrap it up there. And yeah, thanks guys for joining us in the stream. We're sorry if we didn't get to your work for a critique, but yeah, we'll try and get to it in next week or whatever.
Hopefully we can get to it at some point.
And yeah, keep sending stuff in, keep asking questions. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Cool. Sounds good. See you later.